Half-Life 2 belgeseline başlıyoruz. Gazamız mübarek olsun. Kahkahalar.
I always had been doing since my childhood a bit of urban exploration, so I love to break through a window of an abandoned factory or building or train station. So that's one of my hobbies. Used to be, what's on the roofs of buildings? You know, what's in an abandoned building cellar and in a factory. We did a lot of work on this.
Sesi biraz kısayım mı iyi mi? Dur. Şura direkt tanıdık geldi mi? Şurası. Direkt bu arada Half-Life 2'nin girişindeki şey. City 17 tren istasyonu.
At the time when I did my first photo shoot of the Austerlitz station, it was under construction. But then there was no security guards, no fences, even you can just walk and see the broken textures and layers of paint and brick and history. And it was just so cool that I can get this information before it got overbuilt with a new neighborhood.
Peki bura nere? Hakikaten Half-Life 2 hikaye olarak da Doğu Avrupa şehriydi ya. Burası da nere bura yani?
Last night, and it happens to be completely destroyed and under construction again. And it just goes back luckily.
Viktor Antonov bu abimiz şeydir. Büyük abi, sonra Dishonored'da da çalıştı. Dishonored'daki o devasa yaratıklar ya da oradaki mimari City 17'le 17. şehirle çok benzerdir mesela.
To the exact same state where I shot it 25 years ago actually.
Orijinal ekibin çoğuyla röportaj yapılmış. Ama ilk oyunun şeyi ikincisinden çok daha karışık geliştirme süreci. Ki bu hikayelerin çoğu bu vakte kadar gün yüzü görmedi, anlatılmadı. Ay! Bölüm 1. Çıtayı yükseltmek.
So one of the big challenges with Half-Life was just establishing the company.
Oğlum kilo vermiş ha Gaben, değil mi? Gerçi vücudunu görmüyoruz ama sanki biraz kilo vermiş gibi. Saçları uzatmış, bir şirin baba sakalları, onu zaten bırakmıştı. Okey.
And sort of determining whether or not we could actually make video games at all. Like my background was operating systems and spreadsheets. Mike Harrington, who was the co-founder, had a similar background. He had a little more game experience than I did. But with Half-Life, you know, we were pretty sure we were going to fail. And then Half-Life was successful. It was like a lot more successful than we had any reason to expect. And now we had to follow it up, right? We didn't want to have a sophomore slump. We didn't want to be a one and done kind of company. So now we had the terrifying obligation to our customers and to our fans to somehow advance our game design skills, our technology, all needed to level up for the second game.
İşte bu bahsettiğim. Yani o zamanlar daha Steam'den böyle hayvanlar gibi para kazanmadıkları için bir de hem maddi anlamda hem de yükümlülük anlamında şey hissediyorlar. Çıtayı yükseltmeliyiz, daha iyisini yapmalıyız falan. Ama şu anda Steam'den milyarlarca dolar, milyon demiyorum, milyarlarca dolar kazanırken tabii ki böyle bir dertleri kalmıyor. Gidip deadlock, medlock yapıyorlar.
I think a bunch of us were really shocked by the success of Half-Life 1. We were this young, unproven company. I don't think any of us really knew what to expect when we finished the game. I remember when we started working on Half-Life 2, we had already set the bar pretty high for ourselves.
So during Half-Life 2, what we were really trying to do is take advantage of the visibility that Half-Life had created for us in the industry to continue to hire the best people that we could find in the world. It just
Bu arada
got
altyazıyı rahat
easier.
görüyorsunuz
The bar
diye
didn't get any lower, but the fact that we had, it went from, hey, this weird dude who worked on operating systems wants to convince you can run a game company to, oh, Half-Life won a bunch of awards, and now they're
Kazan bir
working
sürü
on a
ödül.
sequel to that.
Deadlock'ı gömüyorum.
My first week
Şeyin
or my
mantığını
first
anlatıyorum
day,
Valve'in.
was actually the going away party for Mike Harrington, the co-founder.
Yeah, I came to Valve when it was just tiny. We had, I think, there were maybe 10 or so people. Dave and I grew up together in Louisiana, so he and I had always talked about maybe starting a game company at some point. And during Half-Life, that kind of changed to maybe instead of that, the dream could be you come and work here at this one, with me.
Yeah, and I interviewed the day that Half-Life went gold, and I took the team photo of.
There's like an old photo of us. We broke a papier-mâché head crab.
Kaç kişilermiş Half-Life Gold olduğunda, yani Half-Life'in şeyi tamamlandığında, ne bu? 3, 6, 9, 10, 13, 16, 19, 22, 25, 27 mi? 30 kişi bile değiller yani. Vay be. Büyük başarı.
And everything.
Yeah, I was freaking out.
Yeah.
I was actually working on a video game concept in high school, and I was seeking a mentor, and I got in touch with Mark Laidlaw at Valve. I guess it was the right time and right place, and quite a bit of luck, and I ended up getting an internship that way. I guess I was 17 at the time.
So you've got a whole company that's familiar with tools and a whole process, and then we just started over. Like, we rebuilt the tools and we rebuilt the engine. So we had this long period of time where we could sort of take our time on design. And so we spent a lot of time working on story and just trying to figure out how to make this thing bigger, like somehow more epic. And those discussions eventually led to this idea that, so in Half-Life 1, you open this portal, some strange rift to another dimension, and we thought, well, what if
Resonance
that
Cascade.
broadcasts
İlk deney,
the
ilk
signal
oradaki.
to the universe that's like, oh, there's this planet there, it's free air and water. And so then we sort of came up with this idea of, well, there's this mega organization that's resource starved, and they're just gonna come and take it if they can.
How many years passed between? 6?
Yeah.
So I would say the first 2 years, we tried a lot of things. And a lot of those story arcs that we had initially didn't have.
Bak o giriş şeyi. Now şurada. Dur bir dakika.
Things. And a lot.
Now Arriving City 17 büyük ihtimalle şeyi. Oyunun giriş hikayesini yazmışlar. İlk 2 senede hani bunlarla uğraştık. Çok bir ilerleyemedik falan. So chill at last in sensation. Duygularını, hislerini şey yapıyor. O sırada oyuncunun, yani doğal olarak Gordon Freeman'ın hislerini, şeylerini, onu da bize efektlerle gösteriyor. Sonrasında mouse takip edin. Rise and Shine. Tamam, Mr. Freeman oldu. Abi değil mi abi ki? Vay be.
A lot of those stories arcs that we had initially didn't have really any carryover from Black Mesa or any of that.
There was originally going to be three different alien races, like the bugs or religious ones, and the Antlions actually came out of that bug race that was supposed to be a much bigger part of the game.
It had 3 alien races: the warrior aliens, the insect aliens, and the spy aliens. And it had like a Prague-like city, which
Prague
ended up being
benzeri
the
bir
closest thing
setup.
to
Bak
City
doğal.
17.
Evet.
In a lot of ways, it reminds me of writing music. Everyone was sort of riffing ideas on, well, what if we did this or tried that? I remember we were really ambitious at the beginning. I remember we designed, 4 cities at one point: Prague, Jerusalem, Chicago, Los Angeles, I believe. We had an Arctic base, an underwater base, an icebreaker ship, an airplane
Arctic üssümüz ve Icebreaker Ship dedi, işte Borealis.
sequence that crashed into a high rise, which we cut
Half-Life
right
3
after
olacak
9/11.
oyunu.
We had several combine bases in the wasteland. We had the air exchange, which is where they were taking, you know, the atmosphere from Earth. We had a train depot and so on. So we really obviously had to scale back what we were trying to do. But, you know, that's okay to go a little bit nuts at the beginning.
I saw it almost as like sophomore anxiety, maybe. You know, like, oh wow, we have to surpass Half-Life, and Half-Life was important, you know, and so it was like this like unbounded ambition.
And we kept asking ourselves, and Gabe kept asking, well, how is this Half-Life? Where, you know, when you have a silent
otomatik çeviri olduğu için Half-Life'in yarılanma ömrü aslında doğru çeviri yapıyor bu arada.
First person narrator, you could tell people this is Gordon and throw that character into literally any environment and say, yeah, this is Half-Life. But unless the environment is telling you that that's the case, it's very arbitrary. So we wrestled with that a long time.
G-Man'i açıklamazlar.
Slowly, the sort of grab bag of characters
yani aslında var da karışık. Yoruma açık G-Man'in şeyi.
There was connections between them, and then at some point we realized, oh, we could make this out of the science team, the survivors from Black Mesa, and suddenly
ne kadar güzel bir oyun.
For me, it was the idea of it's a science team. That suddenly you could put those guys anywhere, and because they have like a familial interconnectedness, and they recognize Gordon, that will make you feel like it's a continuation of this story. Like obviously Alex was totally new to that universe, but she had a father who had been at Black Mesa, and he and the other scientists were friends. And they had extended their relationship into this new world that you were in. That was kind of the click, was the science team. And that was a while till we got there.
You know, much like the first one where all the...
Bu arada şeyi de bulabilirsiniz. Gene Valve'in kanalı. Onları izlemeyeceğiz. Onları ben kendim izlerim de. Orijinal Half-Life'ın orijinal 2002 galiba. E3 2002 E3 2000 demosu falan yani. Hani Half-Life 2'nin ilk hali, önce Gold Source motoru, ilk oyun haliyle yapılmış hali, sonra Source 2 motorunun ilk versiyonlarıyla yapılmış hali falan böyle.
Contributors were really collectively deciding on the direction.
Hoş geldiniz.
Really making a push to grow the team and hire new artists. You know, Zabi Ing
was an influential o tarz videolar böyle şey vay be falan.
I think, you know, he and I were doing character designs for Gordon and for Alex and for some of the antagonist characters.
At the time, I was looking at a lot of, I mean, really the helmets, which I think are kind of one of their defining features, was based off some gas masks from Europe that I had seen in some reference. I remember doing early concepts of the new HEV suit, like what's Gordon gonna be now? And I had kind of just started, and so I was like, I'm gonna make this my own. It looked, I guess, kind of like the still suits in Dune, but black and a lot more belt buckles and latex. And Gabe was just kind of like, what's this? Like, it's Gordon. I was like really proud and excited. He's like, why is it not orange? You know, it's like, or something to that effect of essentially like, why are you giving up this iconic part of the character?
People love it.
Yeah, people love that. So what are you doing? And it's like, you know, I was like, yeah, I guess he's right. So we kind of went back to the drawing board and ended up with what shipped.
And we had like, I don't know, so many creatures that we tried and abandoned, you know, not because they were bad, because we had better things to pursue, you know, more like there were the sack ticks, the cremator, the crab synth, the stalkers
like
as an enemy.
We had
Allah'ın belası stalkerlar. Her gördüğünde onu diyorum. Bu arada iStalker'a da
there was definitely an
alakası olacak ama aklınızda bulunsun. 20'sinde Stalker geliyordu, değil mi? Yani 4 gün sonra Stalker 2 yayınımız olacak YouTube'da. Devam.
Things to pursue, you know, more like there were the sack ticks, the cremator, the crab synth, the stalkers
like
as an enemy.
We had a little bit in the game.
Yeah,
right?
we shipped the stalkers, but not as an adversary that you fought.
Yeah, there was definitely an evolution of how biological versus how synthetic a lot of the creatures in Half-Life 2 were, and I was always hoping to get to a space where it was ambiguous.
Türkçe çeviri evet bugün eklenmiş. İlk çıktığında yoktu.
Doğru. If this was created or if it had grown or if it was natural or synthetic.
There was some synths I did that never shipped. Actually, we did ship them. They were at the end of the game when you're going through the Citadel. I had designed these synths that no animator could figure out how to actually move because they weren't built to move.
And much like some of the environments that we've seen, released in the leak that were very dark, some of the early Half-Life stuff was also very dark. But at the time, video games were very dark.
In the interim, before we hired Fletcher, and before Victor was there, because it was the old environments, right? I don't remember how it came about that they built this level, but the idea was there was some looting going on. And the idea was you're in this little alley and you see a citizen, you hear a voice saying, TV! Free TV! Like they...
Bu inanılmaz bir internet mimi oldu. Hatta Poly'nin mi, Black Hand'in mi? Bununla ilgili videosu var. Globalde de var da bir kurcalayabilirsiniz. Free TVs yazın Free TVs Half-Life 2 yazın. 1000 tane video göreceksiniz. Bunun üzerine neler yapıldı.
Citizen, you hear a voice saying, TV! Free TV! Like they just got into the TV store and there's the citizens and the cops are fighting and you see a citizen run past him holding a TV set and he goes, get one, get a TV, get yourself a TV. And then he runs off down the thing and you go in another courtyard and there's a cop with a nightstick and a citizen and they're like having a fist fight. And it's interesting because the NPCs are negotiating their bounding boxes and there's some animation like how difficult it is to contact.
We captured everything. We took pictures of whiteboard design sessions. There were really crude drawings and ideas. Some of the stuff from the very beginning made it all the way to the end. Ravenholm, Antlion, dog, Kleiner's pet head crab, and those things were just so fun in the moment that how could they not survive, right? The other thing that was really memorable is I remember we started making the world really dystopian, really dark at the beginning, and some of the concept art shows that we didn't think players would enjoy spending 20 to 40 hours in such a dark and a kind of oppressive setting. So the game lightened up considerably over time, but still maintained the feeling of a security state.
So I was trying to get all these cool ideas that
Hep söylüyorum. Antonov büyük adam. Bu adamın 2 oyunu yani öne çıktı. 2 oyun Half-Life 2 ve Dishonored.
Team had already when I arrived.
O şehir tasarımları Antonov'a ait.
Instantly I think we were friends with Mark Laidlaw. We had a common sort of vision and fantasy to create a Orwell-like city. And then slowly, I brought context behind that. The idea that we can place this in an anonymous Central Eastern European city, which is a perfect setting because, in these countries there were so many waves of invasions. We had the Ottoman Empire, we had the Russians, and now why not invasions? We had
As bayrakları gene bak bir Half-Life belgeselinde gene çıktık. The
Ottoman Empire, we had the Russians, and now why not the aliens?
Zamanında uğramıştığımız var Doğu Avrupa'ya, evet.
I remember working on was called Test Room Standards. On Half-Life, every level designer kind of had their own idea of how big stairs were or how big steps were going to be or how big a button was. Make sure we had some consistency. Another thing that was sort of important was just getting more people to go on field trips and going to do research. I think a lot of the level designers on Half-Life 1, just were building very abstractly, and so we wanted to have some more grounding in reality and have more realistic proportions, and also just get textures were going from hand painted to more photographic, and so we would go out and collect a lot of the pictures for those textures to start building for our new library.
I joined Half-Life 2 probably a year after it had started. I know that it was at least a year because I was put on Borealis, which was like everybody else had disowned. But then I came along and said, oh, well, I guess this is now your problem. So I started on Borealis, and of course I failed at that too.
Oh, man.
I eventually got cut.
Yeah, so I came in having had experience doing game AI. I was at Looking Glass Studios. Probably the biggest thing I did there was lead programmer on Thief, the Dark Project. I did the AI for that too.
Evet bu arada şu andaki gibi teknoloji yok. Hani şeyi unutmayın. 20 sene bak oyunun çıkışında 20 sene oldu 2004-2024. Bu geliştirme süreci bir de 3-4 sene öncesine gidiyor. Hatta 4-6 da yani 4 diyelim. 24 sene önceki şeyden bahsediyoruz şu anda. Sonra evet, Nilüzorus'un dediği gibi bir ergen çıkıyor, bu grafikler. Gerçi o zaman kimse öyle diyemedi Half-Life'a. Şimdi diyorlar. Çıktığı zaman inanılmaz bir şeydi yani.
Thing is, they handed Borealis to me to do the
after I'd finished.
To do the AI.
Bunlar ilk defa
for
yayınlanıyor
the
bildiğim
guy that
kadarıyla.
you're supposed to walk through the Borealis ship with.
Yani şöyle, bunların dandik versiyonları vardı, sızdırılan versiyonları. İlk defa Valve kendi gösteriyor bu şeyleri. Borealis dediğimiz Half-Life 3 ya da Half-Life 2 Episode 3'ün geçeceği şeydi, hikayeydi. Oraya ulaşacaklardı.
The AI for the guy that you're supposed to walk through the Borealis ship with.
There was a bunch of work put into it. We even went on an icebreaker ship to get reference. As soon as we started to put it together, we realized how unbelievably tight the space was, and you could never make any kind of really interesting combat in it, and so it just withered on the vine right there.
I mean, when I started, there was that document that was the tech wish list.
Yes.
It was just this very bare bones bullet list of tech features. And I mean, I think it was like 6 years of work to build that tech list and then realize it into a product and leverage all the implications of it, you know?
So this was a main feature that the light felt very, very realistic and intuitive because of the source engine and the collaboration between artists and engineers. Ken Birdwell, and he was a fan about photography and getting the lighting right.
The math that we were using was wrong. And not only that, the math that everybody was using was wrong. And then as I started to correct it, and I realized just how bad it was, and then I fixed it, and suddenly everything looked great, I had to go tell the hardware guys, the people who made hardware accelerators, that fundamentally the math was wrong on their cards. That took about 2.5 years. I could not convince the guys. Finally, we hired Gary McTaggart and Charlie Brown, and those guys had enough pull and enough. I have a fine arts major. Nobody's going to listen to me.
Charlie and I met at college at the University of Florida. We were both getting computer science degrees. Yes. I ended up dropping out to go work at 3DFX as employee 11 there.
3DFX dediği de Nvidia'nın o dönemki rakibi. Bu Half-Life, orijinal Half-Life'ın çıktığı zamanlarda, yani 98-99, 2000'lerin başı, o süreçte iki büyük grafik şeyi vardı. Zaten ilk dönemleri, ikisinde emekleme ve şey dönemleri. Bir tarafta Voodoo 3DFX, işte bahsettiği, diğer tarafta da Nvidia GeForce.
There, and then I think Charlie, you actually graduated, didn't you?
I graduated and then followed you, and I was 17 there.
Yeah.
I was 17 there.
There were three kind of principles. One was to make something that was immersive, visually really rich and appealing, something more like you would see in a film, and the art direction and the technology to make that happen. Second one was to have characters that you cared about, so basically that could react, emote, that mattered in the world instead of just being signposts. Third was to have a responsive environment with physics that mattered.
I think that I, maybe more than other people, realized just how big of a task we were setting for ourselves. So I was a little bit daunted by that.
We felt the pressure from Gabe actually to double down and make something even grander than Half-Life 1. Therein lies the sort of a little bit of the trap of Half-Life 2's development story, which went from being a pretty quick, let's figure out how to do this, to like a 6-year, slog.
Yeah, and it was 6-7 days a week, 10 to 14 hours a day.
Yeah, we're going to cut your feature. Sorry, it's just not worth it.
So I ended up being really the point person.
Bak o da çok üzücü. Hani 1 ay, 3 ay, 1 yıl bu game development'da çok yaşanan bir şey. Hatta arkamda duruyor mu? Ha bak, şu reset hatta da görebilirsiniz. Chat'ten göremiyorsunuz da arkamda bak, şurada parmağımın ucunda kitap var. Jason Schreier'ın Reset At onu çok işliyor. Yani hani gecelerinizi, gündüzünüzü, haftalarınızı, aylarınızı verdiğiniz bir şey başarıyorsunuz ama oyunun o büyük resminde, hani nihai halinde biri çıkıp şey diyebiliyor, o kreatif taraftan birisi. Abi hani eline sağlık ama bunu kullanamayacağız. Belki DLC'leri kullanırız. O ya da sonradan ekleriz. Bu iyi gene, ya da yok abi kullanamıyoruz. Hani işimize yaramayacak. Kusura bakma diyor ve tak 6 aylık işin boşa gitti. Geçmiş olsun.
Working with the FBI
I remember coming in that morning and figuring it out, and it just felt like someone had just punched me in the gut.
What's this mean? Like, can we still keep working on the game? Like, is someone just going to release the whole game tomorrow?
I definitely was not shielded from that.
You know, I remember one conversation with Gabe, which is like, he was like, so how fucked are we? Yeah, we're kind of screwed.
The company was pretty close to going bankrupt. I was pretty close to going personally bankrupt. It's like there was no money left.
I can't think of another case when that happened. Yeah, a real bullshit move.
Are we allowed to cry in this documentary? That's what I want to know.
Kardeşim ağlarsınız da gözyaşlarınızı ne olacak birkaç milyon dolarla silersin nedir? Bölüm 2. Performans.
Remember we shipped Half-Life 1 and, you know, the world loved it and we're just super happy. Like, yeah, we did this thing. And we had a big meeting and Gabe looks at me and goes like, so all the animations are terrible. How are you going to make Half-Life 2 better?
In Half-Life 1, we made what were at the time significant improvements, but still they were fairly robotic and mechanical. And so we had to go and do a huge amount of work on the animation system and on the facial animation system and coming up with authoring tools that allowed you to do it.
Well, end of the line.
A lot of this was level design, like figuring out how to build atmosphere.
Bu arada 20 sene önceki oyunun animasyonu şu anda sırıtmıyor, farkında mısınız? Tabii ki muhteşem değil ama sırıtmıyor. Bak dikkat edin tekrar. Hani şunu bir indie oyunda ya da orta bütçeli bir stüdyo, tabii ki yani büyük bir stüdyoda sırıtır. Call of Duty'de böyle bir şey görsen sırıtır da normal bir indie oyun ya da orta bütçeli bir oyunda fazla geçmiş. Şu sırıtmaz yani.
End of the line.
A lot of this was level design, like figuring out how to build atmosphere. We knew that we wanted to start you off seeing the Citadel right away. And we wanted to introduce you to the city with this great voice acting from Robert Culp. We wanted to finally do real characters. We knew that from Half-Life 1, the way that players would respond to having any character talk to them was like way beyond the reaction that we expected. Like when we figured this out in playtesting, like if Barney would follow you around and shoot things, you just love this guy and you love the scientist and you love these characters. So we knew we wanted to just bring that like way up to the next like levels beyond what we could imagine.
bile fena değil hala.
And the theory was if we could make a character who could act realistically, that would help the player make an emotional connection to the other characters in the game. And at the time we decided we were going to do that, not only did none of the technology work, but I would go talk to industry professionals and they would tell me not to bother because you couldn't do it. Luckily found a research work done in the 70s by Dr. Paul Ekman. And he had just broken down how the face works and how humans make expressions. And he had this incredibly wonderful, formal, clinical description of what a face does.
Bu manyaklık ha. Yani oyunundaki animasyonları referans alabilmek ya da geliştirmek için, onları referans alabilmek ya da geliştirmek için 1970'lerde yapılan bir araştırmayı baz alıp ona göre şey yapman, ilerletmen. Vallahi ne diyelim?
Wonderful, formal,
İşte aşk budur yani yaptığın işe.
Of what a face does and the sorts of things that normal people do with their face.
I tried this experiment with putting a grid on Scott Lynch's face and shooting him from the front and the side so that we could get points from this grid in 3 space for the geometry, and we got shots of his texture, and we found a good way to model a reasonable head, of his geometry, and then project the texture onto it, and then abstract it or stylize it enough so that it didn't look totally photographic, but it looked like a kind of a real person.
Occasionally, when somebody hears the history,
orijinal Barney
it
abimiz bu
will,
muymuş yani?
Generate
Değil
a
mi?
light bulb, but no,
Bir
I
dakika
don't
çok
get
özür dilerim. Scott.
Looked like enough so then project the texture, model the geometry from the front and the side.
Scott Lynch, tamam bu adam ha. Tamam.
And then project the texture onto it, and then abstract it or stylize it enough so that it didn't look totally photographic, but it looked like a kind of a real person.
Occasionally, when somebody hears the history, It will.
Yeri gelmişken ufak bir bilgilendirme daha. Hani Project Borealis dışında o video olarak gelecek. Barney'nin hikayesini anlatan orijinal Black Mesa faciasında Barney'nin şeyini anlatan remake'in adını unuttum. Onu da oynayacağız. O da birkaç gün içinde tamamlanmış olacak. Hani Black Mesa gibi. Black Mesa Gordon'ın hikayesini anlatıyor. Bir de Barney'nin hikayesi. Blue Shift değil de remake hali. Neydi o? Ha gene Blue Shift miydi? Ha o zaman tamam. Onu da oynayacağız yani. Herkesin gözünden göstereceğim ben size olan biteni.
No, I don't get accosted.
Playlist yaparım onları.
No one's asking you for beers or anything.
No. Or buying me beers.
We added Ken's eye tech to that, which was amazing because he really modeled and he went deep into the research of how eyes work.
Eyeballs was about 9 months, just on eyeballs, and
göz bebekleri için 9 ay harcamak.
You have to get the shape of the eye right. You have to get how the eyelid gets pushed by the cornea and the ball of the eye. So as your eyes move around, all your lower lid, your upper lid, all of those get shifted slightly, and it's all automatic. It was wonderful. The day I got it working, the characters went from looking like interesting dolls to Alex just looked at me. Oh my God, this is working.
They would ask for surprising things at times, like they wanted really fine control over looking at named objects in the 3D world, no matter what direction the actor is facing. So you had to figure out things about, oh, maybe the upper body needs to turn and the head needs to turn and the eyes need to turn.
So we're in the elevator coming back from Starbucks to get morning coffee, and we saw this face, and it's like, that's him! That's the scientist! And he was an accountant in the...
Kleiner abimiz. Vay. Kahve içerken mi bulmuşlar lan bu adamı?
That's him! That's the scientist! And he was an accountant in the firm below ours in Kirkland.
Yeah, nothing kind of blows your mind when you've been working all day on this character in your game, and all of a sudden you get on the elevator and you're like, holy crap.
Olaya bak. Dünyanın en ünlü muhasebecisi aslında. Yüzde en çok tanınan muhasebecisi.
Cast people that were real change vendors in front of supermarkets. We cast waiters in restaurants.
When I was in junior high school, I took karate classes, and that was my old karate instructor.
Randy Lundeen said, hey, there is a guy holding a sign for work at this exit on 520 every day who has this great face, and he took a picture of his face, and he stopped and asked if he could. And so it's like, oh, this is great. I think this guy's Eli. We brought him in and, paid him a couple $100, which is what we were paying people back then, and so that's where he came from.
Resmen İlay'ı sokaktaki reklam panosu tutan adamı bulup getirmişler. $200 vermişler ve dünyanın gene en ünlü oyun karakterlerinden birine dönüştü.
Each was a Bosnian friend from that I knew from school. He was like, we want the East European contingent and stuff too, so it was pretty interesting.
We wanted anybody to feel a part of the world when they're playing it as the player, and so we found people from pretty much every skin color, different ages, male and female, equal numbers of males and females. Sadly for them, they all had to share the same voice actor.
Sadly for us too.
We dropped a crate of rockets coming across the plaza. We hoped for one more fighter to help storm that barricade. We never dreamed it would be you.
I mean, Kleiner's Lab was the first prototype that we did of how characters could work together in a scene.
Yeah, it was like a proof of concept. Yeah. We kind of had to make that work, and put everything we could into it at the time to test all the technology, and then know from there what can we do, what else can we do with this.
Turning it into a performance that would be engaging rather than just audio, radio play kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, that was the point where that scene was where it all started to come together, all our theories and hopes for what the experience might be.
And it all went completely smoothly. It was out of the box. It was amazing.
The most difficult technical aspects are really kind of boring. They're okay, the character is running through AI and now they need to jump in and do, hug another character. Now they need to pick up something from the desk, and that thing on the desk can move, and where the character is can move, and where the player is can move, and everything about this whole scene can move dynamically. And to get to that stage where it just looks right is this huge technical challenge and artistic challenge. But once it's done, it's just amazing.
Couldn't snap out of it. You're staring at me again.
Warming up nicely.
Are you sure you don't want me to swap out the polarizer?
I remember when we got Fletcher on, and he would kind of teach us about how they did things at Disney, and they would bring in acting coaches for the animators. What does sarcasm look like? Certain expressions, and there's a timing to those expressions. And
when you have a scene with multiple characters,
Trophy
it's
Hunter'ı
not
biliyorum onu,
always the
evet.
person talking that's doing the acting, right?
O kadar cool lan
you
bu
know,
abimiz.
even though you may be looking at Kleiner because he's the one talking, every character in that scene around you, behind you, they're all doing stuff because not everybody's going to be looking at the same place.
Yeah, I remember even just like when Alex teleports and then you see her show up on the screen, right?
Oh, that was
and she's
incredible.
Heads over, gives him a
worried.
quick kiss, and what?
Yeah.
Like it tells you so much about the relationship without having to say, "Hi, Dad, I love you," and all
Right.
this extra like heavy-handed stuff. So.
Jake was a random demo reel that was sent in. That was incredible.
Jake was incredible.
Jake was incredible. Like, miss that guy.
One of a kind.
Yeah, miss that guy. Amazing technical animator.
Yeah, I mean, Jake was one of those guys that, you know.
Adamın bir şey mi oldu lan? Çok özlüyorum falan filan deyince.
Technical animator.
Yeah, I mean, Jake was one of those guys that, you know, whatever needed to be done, he would figure it out and just make it happen, you know.
It'll just get done correctly.
Geçmiş zamanlı konuşuyorlar da Jake was diye.
When all this was taking place, like the problems that he was helping solve were just things that weren't being done. Even something as simple as passing someone an object between two characters sounds super simple, but actually really complex, especially back then.
Yeah.
And so he really helped push like how do we even do this in collaboration with the programmers.
Zabi wanted to do a goo thing, so I worked on the shader for that. I did the stuff for rendering that and all the little monitors everywhere that showed other scenes. I did the refraction shaders and the supporting code for that. The shaders didn't really have conditionals or loops or anything like that, so we would unroll it all and compile a bazillion shaders. It got to the point where it was so many shaders and it took so long to compile that I think Mike DeSalt implemented distributed building system. Everyone's machine in the company was running something that could sit there and compile shaders all the time or do lighting for the levels or whatever.
It's all like any opportunity to kind of add to the visual storytelling, I think was...
Yeah, and I think we hid the first G-Man sighting.
He was one, that's
Çok
right,
fazla detay var. Bu arada hani oynarken bizim fark etmediğimiz mesela bazı şeyleri ben de izleyince yapıyorum. Bu arada Hakan olmuş olabilir abi. O normal soru sordu anladığım kadarıyla o arkadaş. Şimdi gördün de. Time out mu? Time out mu şey? Yani o adam o arkadaş rahmetli mi olmuş ben de anlamadım ama geçtiğimiz zamanda konuştu. Çok özlüyorum. Ulan her şeyi çözerdi, hallederdi gibi konuşunca bilemedim. Neyse oynarken biz sürekli belli bir aksiyona odaklanıyoruz ya. O bizim bile bakmadığımız detaylarla uğraşmaları ne kadar güzel bu arada. Yani ne kadar güzel değil. Tabii ki yapmaları lazım ama yapmalarına gerek yok. Ama işte iyi bir oyunla efsane bir oyun arasındaki fark da o detaylarda oluyor. Yoksa birçok iyi oyun var ama birkaç tane efsane var böyle aklımıza hemen gelen.
First G-Man sighting.
He was one. That's right. He was one of the monitor. It would flip to him.
Şunlara ben hiç o kadar da bakmadım yani.
The moment where you see him makes you realize there must be a lot of moments where you didn't know he was watching you. He's not Big Brother. That doesn't make sense to me that he would be a Big Brother because that's
İstiyorum bunu. Ben de istiyorum evime.
Industrial and bureaucratic. And this is much more intimate. He's always over your shoulder, watching, waiting for the moment to speak. That's where I think he lives. My name is Mike Shapiro, and I am G-Man. I am also Barney. And, you know, Barney's he's not that far from, you know, G. Gordon, like, he's not that far from where I live. You know, he's so fallible and you know, he's always tripping over himself, and he's just such a good guy, you know. Not necessarily the most capable, but just really there for you.
Get that thing away from me. Here, my pet. Hop up.
I think early on I had a sense that G-Man knew a lot and was taking care of a lot that we didn't quite understand, was kind of enjoying fucking with people and massaging reality in a way that he had a unique capacity to do. There were also aspects to him that I knew pretty early on, like his relationship to time is very different than you or I would think. In my mind, he could literally be in two places at once, and so sometimes there was a kind of an implied hitch in his timing, or he's experiencing 2 or 3 different moments at once, and that might be funny for a reason that you don't know because you're only in one time with him at a moment.
The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference in the world.
I think as we realized how well she worked, coming out of stuff like the Kleiner's Lab experience, we started looking for more and more ways to include her in stuff.
And of course, she really came to life when we found Merle Dandridge.
Yeah. We could feel her already as a
bu da
partner
Alex
in
abla.
creating this character, I think, coming out of that. She's just got a creative relationship with this character, and she's going to bring a lot to it.
I feel like she was really able to bring a warmth and humor into her deliveries, too, that other people, it was more like Soldier in a Game a little bit. I mean, she did this great job of bringing like a character warmth into it.
And now we're sitting ducks unless we can get this thing running. Come on, Dr. Kleiner, is it gonna work or not?
No, there's nothing to be nervous about. Let's see. The massless field flux should self-limit, and I've clamped them up.
My name is Harry Robbins. I'm known as Hal Robbins. I have a stage name of Dr. Hal. My only doctorate is in theology from the Church of the Subgenius, which I'm involved in. Well, I think perhaps Mark was familiar with the things I do on the radio, and he thought my voice would be good for it. I have a monthly Ask Dr. Hal show on Twitch and Zoom, and I'm also on a couple of radio shows. Well, I'm a graphic artist. I've worked for DC Comics.
Be dayı, sen grafik artistmiş şeyi, Kleiner'ı seslendirmiş, kilisede papazmış, Twitch'te yayıncıymış, şeyine vaizmiş, kendi şeylerine, elemanlarına her hafta bir de vaazmış. Neymişsin ya? Her şey adam.
Comics for their Paradox Press line. Well, I have some patrons who I do painting for. I've painted many things for them. I played Dr. Isaac Kleiner after I did the voice of a number of different scientists. I try to pronounce all the words. I make sure to aspirate to consonants. For example, I don't say didn't the way most people do, even newscasters today. I always make sure to say didn't. Perhaps it sounds archaic that way. Mark wrote archaic expressions into my dialogue, and I would say things like, oh, fie, and so forth.
No, not up there! No! Careful, Lamar. Those are quite fragile! Oh, fie. It'll be another week before I can coax her out of there.
Yeah, longer if we're lucky.
Barney, you're not an animal person.
It was always pleasant. I was always
Şerefsiz
welcome.
Lamar.
They were always patient. Even if I mispronounced something which was obvious, they would correct me and I would pay attention. And I always try to be as close as possible to a one-take wonder so they don't have to do it again. But that enabled them to do it many times. And so they had a lot of things which arose from that. And some of these are the things I'm asked to say by fans, which are inexplicable to people who don't know the game. Like, you want this guy to say, have you seen my coffee cup? And why do we all have to wear these ridiculous ties?
Fizik. Half-Life 2'yi, Half-Life 1 zaten çok başarılı bir oyundu ama Half-Life 2'yi efsane yapan şey hakikaten fizik motoruydu. Yapabildiği şeylerdi. O belki bugün, belki daha sonra izleriz ya da siz de izleyebilirsiniz. Half-Life 2'nin E3 demosuna bakın. Tamamen motorun fizik yetenekleri üzerinde kurulu bir şeydi. Mesela ateş ediyor, tak tak tak tak her şey devriliyor. Ya da suya bir şey düşüyor, suyun kaldırma kuvvetiyle yükseliyor. Ama mesela bir yatak şiltesi yükselirken içi dolu bir varil dibe batıyor gibi vesaire. Ya da işte Gravity Gun'la yapılanlar vesaire vesaire.
So in the same way that we thought it was important in Half-Life 1 that when you shot a wall, that we put decals on the wall to indicate that you shot it. We wanted to say, okay, what happens when you throw a grenade at a bunch of boxes, right? The world itself needed to be more reactive to everything you did.
We used some third-party code, but Jay Stelly was the one who really wrote the wrapper on that integrated it.
And physics was even early in the project was pretty successful. Right? Once we got over the initial thing of like things falling over, and we started adding breakable objects, things you could script and hammer.
Bunlar E3
we added
demosundan
vehicles, sound cues from all the objects, and the AIs, you could drop things on them and crush them, things like that. All of those behaviors, once we got just a few of those things in, that was really fertile.
For everyone who worked on Half-Life 2, masses got broken down into a set of scales that I assume someone's already talked about. No? Okay.
Well, you say.
So yeah, all right. So the question is whether it's bigger than a bread box or smaller than a space station.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's.
When you went to debug something and the text says, "Oh, this thing weighs as much as a racehorse."
Yeah. You knew it was more than a bread box.
You're like, well,
but not as much as a space station.
I think so, but I don't know in the scale if it's closer to this or closer to that.
Yeah, because
refrigerator.
Refrigerator. This all came from, at some point, I think it was David Spira.
Yeah.
So you could look at any entity in the game and turn on a bunch of debugging text about it. And one of the most important things to get right in every object in the game that was physically simulated was its mass, because that dictated an enormous amount of things, like the amount of force it would apply to something else when it hit them, and the amount of force, its response when it's hit by something else, all that stuff. Had to get it right. But of course, like mass is just a number. Like, what does this mean to anyone? And so I think it was David Spira who found online some list of masses and objects, and he just
oyunun belli aşamalarında hep bu sahnelere denk gelmişsinizdir siz.
Racehorse or something. So over time,
evet, 20 sene sonra hala bu fizik motorunu ya da bu özellikleri yapamayan oyunlar var.
It went from things like, bread box, paint can or something up to like space stations.
Yeah, the moon. You're like, what?
So,
what do I do with this? At this point, it's just keyframe at that point.
Yeah, so there would be many like conversations where we'd say, I don't know, do you think that's more like a racehorse or the space station?
The very first physics puzzle that we put in the game, from a development calendar standpoint, was the washing machine puzzle, where you push the washing machine into the hopper and raise the ramp for the airboat to jump over. We developed that because we felt like we had this section of relentless pressure with the attack helicopter.
Allah belasını versin, zor bölümdü
they needed relief from it.
RTX gelsin, tekrar oynayacağız Half-Life 2'de. 3 günde ona şey yaparız.
With the teeter-totter that you have to put the cinder blocks on, which was added to the game later, and it's sort of training of like, hey, you can interact with levers and balance and create paths for yourself. And then later the buoyancy puzzle, we added that one after the washing machine puzzle, and it was just kind of like, oh.
Bu arada bu özellikler Black Mesa'da hani Source 2 motoruyla yapıldığı için Black Mesa'da buna benzer puzzle'lar vardı, hatırlayacaksınız. Bu varilleri yapıyorduk, platformun altına koyuyorduk. O platform işte suyun kaldırma kuvvetiyle platform yükseliyordu vesaire vesaire.
You can connect masses with invisible
Şunun aynısı Black
pulley
Mesa'da vardı.
systems and then build little machines that way.
Bu sahne E3 demosu.
Right, the gravity gun was kind of this. We weren't even sure we were going to ship it in the game. It was like a development tool. And so it was like this beam, you could reach out and grab things and pull them toward you or reposition them, drop them, grab them from another point. But then we talked about simplifying it and just making it to where it was just pushing on things and pulling on things. And where could we go with that?
And the first draft of Ravenholm wasn't really about physics so deeply, right? We ended up reorganizing the game to put Ravenholm after you get the gravity gun. Originally it was before. You would park the airboat at the dock of Ravenholm and then get out and go explore Ravenholm.
Allah'ım, oyunun en tedirgin, en lanet yeri hakikaten ya.
We wanted like a horror area since in a lot of ways Half-Life was a horror game and the horror was kind of leaching out of Half-Life 2. So we at least wanted one environment that was just scary. And then we had a design meeting where
Başarılı.
Doug Wood said,
Ravenholm oynayan herkesi ilk
"Preacher
oynayışında
with a shotgun."
germiştir.
And I was like, oh, yes.
The important thing to know is like we didn't sit down and design Ravenholm as like the tutorial for all those things. It kind of kept getting things over time. And then after we got more physics working, we had this idea that there would be traps for the zombies in there that were physics. And there were a bunch of them, and they didn't all make it into the final game. And then some of them did work though, and we had to build a system for cutting the zombies in half once we added the propeller traps, and we had to make them the right height so you could crawl under them or the zombies could crawl under them. And then someone had the idea, well, what if the top half can keep going and it can get you under there? We tried that and that was great. Someone had the idea of saw blade, and Ravenholm like already existed, and we ended up like based on this behavior happening in another level, like built the saw blade and went and put it back in Ravenholm.
Ravenholm was probably some of the most fun I had working on.
Bu arada hep Half-Life'tan bahsederken şeyi anlatıyorum mu? Çok kısa çevresel anlatım. Hem Half-Life 1'de hem 2'de. Kastettiğim şu. Daha uygulamalı gösterebileceğim için. Burada ilk işte Gravity Gun'la girdiniz şeye. Ravenholm'a girdiniz. Böyle bir şey var karşınızda. Hani bir hızar bir elemanı ikiye biçmiş. Sonra hızarı çekiyorsun, ceset düşüyor. Diyorsun ki doğal olarak hani bunun için herhangi bir tutorial'a gerek yok. Bunun için bir yerde if you işte take the hızar and push out to enemy ikiye böler diye bir açıklama yazmasına gerek yok. Sadece şunu görüyorsun. Okey, bunu ben düşmana fırlattığımda demek ki biçiyor. Sonra da bunu görüp aldıktan 3 saniye sonra düşman geliyor.
Like based on this behavior,
ve o gördüğünü direkt uyguluyorsun.
Like built the saw blade and went and put it back in Ravenholm.
Okey, olayı buymuş. Çevresel anlatım işte.
On Half-Life 2, the whole idea behind Ravenholm and that we were going to starve you of ammo, so it forced them in a position where they have to rely on physics and the context of the objects around them. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be awesome if the zombie who it's going to take him 30 more seconds to get to me, but he's got like a barrel right there. Like, what if he could swat that at me? So that was definitely something that was just like, we have physics now. This would be a cool thing to do with it, and it'd be a thing that would make sense and a thing that would be scary and fun.
One of the things that John was like extremely strong at was little touches, like I think we called them puzzlets.
We did call them puzzlets.
Like they weren't puzzles, they were puzzlets.
Yeah, it's this little thing that takes you between 5 and 60 seconds to resolve, and at the end you either get something or you feel a certain way, and it was really a big part of making sure that like minute-to-minute gameplay, as we called it, was interesting. Yeah, he was good at that.
We actually did this as an exercise of like, okay, take, all the elements in the game and have a grid of, rows and columns of all those elements, and make sure that there's a meaningful thing at each intersection of those cells, so that everything has a meaningful interaction with everything else. And where we saw empty cells, we would actually design a thing.
Yeah, like, is there something we could do there?
Yeah, barnacles plus grenades or whatever. Okay, we need to make sure that they'll eat the grenade and then blow up.
Like the reason we build these scripting level design tools, it's just it makes it accessible for all the people on the team, even if you can't write code, to like put something together, try out an idea. See what we can do with this. And the entity system's no different, right? A lot of things the level designers just want to, like, I have this idea for something that could happen. Is that fun?
Look to your own salvation.
Manyak.
Yeah, I was on TF2 at that time. And I don't remember exactly. I think it was during 2000 maybe? Someone else has probably told you this and got the dates actually right. But at some point we all jumped from TF2 over to Half-Life 2. I feel like that marks the sort of, in some ways in retrospect, like the end of like pre-production really on Half-Life 2, and it becomes now like, let's build this thing and ship it.
Allah Allah, ne yolculuklarmış.
Actually, the first thing I got told to work on was a jet ski.
And I spent 3 weeks trying to figure out a jet ski in first person. I was like, okay, none of this is working. I don't see how do you do this without making people sick? So I remember one weekend out of frustration, I just made the airboat. I don't know, maybe it's the Florida bit in me.
So Charlie Brown had worked on the airboat, and then we picked it up, a different group. We started working on the canals, and we had this idea of it was going to be kind of like a lot of tricks under pressure, where you're doing like skateboarding type moves. I think it was Kelly Bailey who basically said, I'm playing the canals and I'm trying to do these tricks and I'm failing, and then I'm getting shot. And he's like, I want to be like Smokey and the Bandit. I just want to be smashing my way out. We did this whole other pass of the canals where we dialed down the consequences for failing the tricks, and we dialed up the feeling of, power.
Some players absolutely refused to really stay in their airboats.
Bu arada ufak bir bilgilendirme geçeceğim arkadaşlar. Şu dedim ya midemi üşüttüğüm için o kötüyüm. Wireless kulaklıktayım. 2 dakika, 3-4 dakika ben içeride olacağım ama dinlemeye devam ediyorum. Sizin de bir şey oldu, hani kritik bir şey olursa da geldiğimde anlatmaya devam edeceğim.
They wanted to get out and look under every rock, behind every tree. For those players, we had to craft enough density through the lengths of the canals to keep them entertained and happy. And then there were people who just wanted to smash through everything and treat it like a racing sim. And so the game had to be fun and interesting for them, and sometimes that would clash.
If you stop here, we're going to give you a reward, basically, either a narrative reward or like an actual in-game reward. The lambda caches, the lambda signs, we use them a lot more in the canals, and part of that is literally because we did it afterwards. I'd worked on coast maps, and we didn't have that yet.
The canals are restrictive because we want you to drive this airboat through them, and we've got all these fun things to do. Like you could jump over things, you could smash through things. The worst case scenario is you're trapped with people who have guns and they're shooting at you, and you don't necessarily have a way of shooting back. So, that led to, we need to add a weapon to the vehicles.
Well, part of it was the helicopter was such a persistent pain in your ass that we really wanted to put a bow on that whole experience and give you some vindication, some, vengeance, where you get to now hunt the helicopter. So as soon as we attach it, one thing we really intentionally did is you start to drive down the tunnel and the helicopter pops down in your face and it's blocking you, and you have no choice but to just shoot it if you want it to go away, and then you see it flee. And so it's like, oh, okay, the players could connect the dots, right? Now it's my turn. So the next sequence is all about chasing the helicopter down to that final battle at the dam. I remember we worked pretty intentionally to make it the ultimate showdown between you and the helicopter, and some of it was by accident. I remember Brian Jacobson, who did a lot of the code for that, at one point, it accidentally did this thing where it just spit out a ton of bombs. And we're like, that is awesome. Keep that. Make that part of the fight. We tried to make it as action intensive as we could within reason, right? That battle was actually, in a way, we designed it to be a final exam. We unraveled those elements into the levels beforehand, right? You learned how to dodge bombs. You learned how to shoot at it. And you learned how to shoot while driving. And then we throw those things together at you with a little bit of a twist.
Canals was sort of like a crucible because a lot of good things came out of it because it was such a difficult design problem. The easy thing to do is to make a punishing design where you just say, you can't go here and we're going to shoot you and force you to fail and fail and fail until you get to see the next part of the game. It's much harder to create something where the player feels there's an evolution, they have some power and some agency, so their skill is being rewarded and they can be creative in that restrictive environment.
Take a spin around the beach till you got a feel for the car. When you're done, head for the salt and a little butter.
So basically had a whole car engine down to through transmission, down into gearing and differentials and turning the tires. But then it turned out we can really only go 15, 20 miles an hour. Otherwise, you would blast through the extents of the map in about 10 seconds, which wasn't going to do anybody any good. People made jumps, they made all these things. Nothing was working. So I was like, oh, you must be doing a jump. I'm just going to turn off gravity on the car for a little while and let it just go, and then gradually ramp it back in so that it actually felt like you were jumping.
It was interesting how like the dynamics of the buggy was so much about like the perceived experience versus how it actually like performed.
It just sounds like it's going faster than it is. So Jay and I worked really hard on these engine sounds and this fake transmission and doing all this stuff. But you're really going like 30 miles an hour maybe. So it's like someone just driving around in first gear.
Got pulled into Coast, one, because I was interested in working on more game stuff, but two, it was the biggest, I guess, group of people utilizing the displacement tech, since it was more of a terrainy thing and outdoors. And we were trying to figure out how we wanted to use the displacements, meaning we knew we wanted the things to look more natural. There was a lot more geometry in those maps than our previous ones, given just displacements in general. We were always struggling with performance and trying to figure out how to make things a little bit faster or easier, or where we could make things do what we wanted them to do, but not necessarily cost as much as they cost.
It's much faster than walking speed. So you just signed up for building a huge amount of game. People can just stop and get out anywhere. So now you have this trade-off of density versus distance.
We got a vehicle we want to drive for a while, so make those levels long. But from Half-Life 1, we still had the philosophy of there should be something cool around every corner. Not like a monster popping out of you, but different reasons to be engaged in the world. So they would dot the coastline with little towns, and you knew if you went exploring, you'd always get some kind of reward for that. It might be a health pack and ammo, or it might be a character interaction. So that would let the player set their own pace and feel like they get to explore the world, and they're always rewarded for that. But if they wanted to drive straight through, they could.
Half-Life 2'de bolca el bombası kullanacağım. Black Mesa'da çok başarılı değildim. 2'de herkes bomba
you're going along a curving path, and then there's like they blow up all the rocks and drop stuff in front of your path to try and slow you down, and then you've got like a little house fight. There were cases early on where people would just try to drive past everything and be like, why would I stop at this if I've got a car? And so we really wanted them to like be fairly unavoidable, and so you'd have to get out and deal with taking them off your car, and then you'd be in the space. So it was really fun just jumping in there with the Combine soldiers and crafting little fight scenarios.
Ben de Half-Life 2 RTX'i bekliyorum
AI fights
hatta.
interesting is not that they're the smartest or the best or anything. Like, it's easy to make AI that can just perfectly shoot the player and kill them. That's not what makes them smart. It's putting on a show that makes them feel interesting. So like in that fight in particular, you go up inside of a building and you get to the second floor, and you're fighting guys in there, and they kind of pull you up there. There's guys up in there, and as you go up and fight them, that happens. But then more guys spawn outside. Like, there's a bunch of windows up in that top section, and there's a crate sort of near the window, and when you go over to get that crate, they start shooting through the window at you. And it's not that the AI actually knows that you're there and starts shooting at the window the moment they see you. There's actually, we have these things called bullseyes that you could place in spots, and they basically would act like a target that the AI wanted to shoot.
Yakında diyor, tarih belli
actually the AI being
Ama
doing
yakında
this
yani.
carefully crafted thing. It's more of us thinking like, what makes this like a neat presentation for the player and gives them that sense that they need to hunker down. Like later on in the same coastline, there's a sequence where you're fighting a gunship and you're in the lighthouse, and as you go up the lighthouse, it's like sort of predicting where you are and shooting through the windows right in front of you and giving you that same sort of show. And that's all like bullseyes and things. Almost every game you play, you're developing a sense of mastery, and that actual sense of progress and mastery is the fun. Piecing it all together
Nasıl
is
şey yapıyor
like,
lan,
very core
daş
to
diyor,
what makes it
yönü
fun.
değiştiriyor. Neye göre?
Hello, Dr. Freeman. The car's all ready for you.
Ha,
Hop in and I'll lower you down to the beach.
sahile indirecek.
We did the player drivable crane first, I think, right? And
Yes.
then we went back and used it again, at the start.
That's a perfect
as
tutorial.
yeah.
Like, it's perfect training. This is how that thing works.
Yeah.
Don't forget, because it's about to happen later.
Yeah.
You have to do it.
We did actually get very close to the base of a crane. Obviously you want to be in the crane, you want to be driving it, all these things. But yeah, we did get up very close to this crane again. I think it was asking somebody, we're just wanting to take some pictures for a video game. Could you just let us in, try to act as like nice and non-threatening as possible?
We need the buggy to get into a state where it was flipped, so you could have to learn to recover it and all that sort of stuff.
Like, oh, we're gonna flip it over, and then you have to proceed, you have to use the gravity gun. We're just trying to wrap that in some sort of narrative instead of just spitting some text that tells you with this
Bahsettiğim bu yani.
That was, I mean, the crane was a hard physics problem.
Seni o konuma, o pozisyona sokuyor ve yapmanı bekliyor. Hani bunu yani çözmen için gerekli zaten altyapı şeyi sağlıyor. İnerken bir anda araban ters döndü. Çatışın, bunu düzeltmen lazım yola devam etmek için. Elinde ne var? Gravity gun var. Ha okey. Bunu bu arabanın üzerinde bir deneyeyim o zaman.
Because like one of the worst case scenarios for physics is really, high mass objects moving around because they're going to apply an enormous amount of force to
Sorunun
anything they
çözümü
touch.
de veriyor. Evet. O yola koyuyor
And we have a
seni. Nasıl
rigid body
çözeceğini.
physics system.
Doğrudan
So,
çok özür dilerim. Geri alacağım 5 saniye. Ekrana hani şu anda Ubisoft oyunlarında ya da işte Activision oyunlarındaki gibi flip the car demiyor. Ya abi araban ters düştü. Seni buraya indirdiklerine göre buradan gitmen gerekiyor bu arabayla. Ne yapacaksın? O zaman düzelteceksin. Bu yani zaten olay.
Force to anything they touch.
Evet, arabanın patlama ihtimali yok.
We have a rigid body physics system. So in the real world, when giant heavy mass touches something, usually it crushes them. We can't really crush anything. So already we're in like a tricky place. The good news was we had a fixed space it could operate in, right? We could control how far you could extend the thing. And so as the level designers could look at it and be like, these are the only things that the crane will ever really be able to interact with. And so we could be pretty careful around, right, what are the things that this magnet's going to touch? And let's make sure that at least the physics works pretty well for that.
So I worked on the bridge as one of the really early things I worked on there, which was great. Sawyer had already built the bridge. It's actually based on Deception Pass. So Deception Pass is nearby here in Washington. Coincidentally, I actually proposed to my wife there. But anyway, it's this really nice bridge that, like, if you go there, you'll be like, oh yeah, this is the Half-Life 2 bridge. The fight against the gunship and everything wasn't really all put together. It was definitely had that, like, scary,
parkour.
Fear of heights scenario of going under the bridge.
Scary parkour.
We hadn't fully fleshed it all out yet. One of the first things I did was like, what if this was a train bridge and you had to do this, play chicken against the train? And getting the timing quite right took a little bit of work, but hearing the train horn come in and the moment of realization that players would have of probably some people die, a lot of people probably die the first time there, but you have this do I go faster or do I turn around? What do I do? I don't know, it was a fun moment to create. All credit to Sawyer on coming up with the going underneath the bridge scenario. People to this day still are like that.
Herkes orada bir kere öldü en azından. Olayı çözene kadar.
Which is just, it's what we want to do when we're creating levels.
Trying to capture the sense of height and playing with the ambient sounds to get the, just to capture the sense of being precarious and high above the ground was just a fun little design challenge.
David came up with that. And we play tested it, and the first time we play tested, I think the person who was play testing, their knuckles were white, and it was really tense. And of course, then someone had the brilliant idea of they finally made it, they felt great, now we're gonna make them go back. And the gunship, that came in, so that was always fun.
Aga. Bunlar hepimiz yaşadık bu.
So when you're moving, you have a friction that just reduces your normal movement rate by an amount. But what we would do is whenever players would get close to edges, we would increase that friction a lot so that people wouldn't accidentally fall off things. It's just not fun for the player, right? So there was definitely a bit of friction play involved there.
Gordon Freeman!
Yeah, baby.
Hurry, get in the basement. We're expecting gunships at any moment.
He became iconic for reasons I don't totally understand except the performance. We were calling that town Little Odessa or Little Old New Odessa. And then I got spam email from Odessa Cubbage or something like that. It was definitely a name that came out of an email spam. And I'm like, this name is amazing. So it went straight into the game. And then John Lowry came in and acted him with his fake British accent.
Damn. Let me just send a warning to Lighthouse Point, and then I'll come right up and lend a hand.
So Odessa Cubbage had this whole problem of like training the rocket launcher. That was a real pain. The laser guiding aspect was just a nightmare to train because training in combat's always a nightmare by itself because people are under duress, trying not to die. They're focusing on some other thing that's threatening them. It's hard to observe what's going on rationally and draw lessons from
En az
it
3
cleanly.
roket mi istiyordu bu ya?
So you always
Bir de
know it's gonna be
sektiriyordu
hard
roketleri
trying
bu
to
değil mi bir
teach
şekilde?
something, you're trying to teach in combat. We watch a playtester, they step out and they fire a rocket at the gunship and then they duck behind cover. So the laser dot goes onto the fence in front of them. We all hear the rocket turn around and start coming back, and so you hear
It's basically, here we go, 5, 4, 3.
and then the player looks out again at the gunship and the rocket goes, like moves around back at the gunship, and we're like, oh! And then he ducks back again, and we're like, oh my God! We hear the rocket getting louder and louder, and he peeks out again and whips off again.
An integrated part that I think has really always been important, something that Gabe introduced in Half-Life 1, was the way that we playtest and then iterate really rapidly on the playtest results. So you have dozens and dozens of people come through one section of the game, and you sit there painfully, silently, taking notes while they struggle and get frustrated and totally misunderstand your brilliant design. And then you go and you fix that over and over and over again.
If your title is game designer and your design sucks, then it can be threatening, right? Like maybe I'm bad at my job and I should get fired, right? And so a lot of the games industry never did any testing at all. With this playtesting process, that's what basically taught me design in a lot of ways. We would just, we'd come up with an idea for the helicopter and then we'd be like, okay, let's put it in front of somebody and watch it happen. And then we'd very quickly start realizing that our mental model of like how people are reacting to this stuff is wildly different than what we expected.
Yok kanka, oradan zorlayarak olmaz.
I joined the team in January 2000. I had met Gabe when he was starting Valve, and I was at Sierra Online. But pretty much the first thing was, Gabe was like, so when you were at Sierra, we did this deal with you for Half-Life and Half-Life 2. You need to go fix that because we don't like the deal that we did. The intellectual property for Half-Life was owned by Vivendi. The Team Fortress IP was owned by Vivendi. So it was get back our IP, get a better royalty rate, and then have the ability to experiment with online distribution. We knew we were going to grow
O zaman başlıyor bak.
And then part of the deal was also...
Bu arada evet, ilk Steam'in şeyi, yani birçoğunuz biliyordur ama Steam'in başlangıcı Half-Life, Half-Life 2, Team Fortress, işte Episodlar falan filan, bunları şey yapmak için. Bunları online dağıtım olarak başlıyor. Tabii ki adamların o vizyonu var. Sonra yavaş yavaş tık tık tık o indi, bu indi, şu oyun derken AAA markalar, carçurtlar ve bugünkü haline geliyor. Ama çok kimse inanmıyor. Hani bu şey gibi, Steve Jobs iPhone'u ilk duyurduğunda herkes şey diyor ya, bu ne lan, $1000 dokunmatik telefon satıyorsun, millet nasıl tuşları bırakıp dokunmatiğe alışacak diye Microsoft yöneticileri alay ediyor diyor tombik adam. Şeyde de aynı sistem var. Çünkü dehşet bir perakende sistemi var. Hala günümüzde bile azalmış olsa da var yani. Bir 20 sene öncesini düşün. Öyle bir sistem varken ve o kadar insan bundan ekmek yiyor ve rant elde ediyorken, kar elde ediyorken böyle bir online dağıtım sisteminin internet altyapıları patates o zaman. Tabii ki bizim kadar patates değildir 20 sene önce ama Amerika'da da muhteşem değildir. Ama işte oluyor. Orange Box, evet. Orange Box içeriğindeki Half-Life, işte 2, Episodlar, Team Fortress'lar falan filan, oradan Ricochet, oradan bir başlıyor. Ve işte Steam'in bugünkü hali.
That we were going to take on all of the funding responsibility for Half-Life 2, TF2, all those things. There was cash flow from Half-Life. We were figuring out how to do things here and there, like expansion packs. A large part of it was Gabe tapping into his assets. He had done fairly well at Microsoft, not crazy well, but things started to get a little thin.
Sıkıntılı süreç. Entropy Zero'yu da oynayacağım. Evet, aha. Ne bu be, davalar? Yoksa şu...
So I assume you guys have talked to
Scott or Eric or somebody about sort of the context of the
Piyasaya
whole.
sızdırılan
Yes, we
versiyon.
talked to Scott, Eric, and Gabe about it.
Ha yok, Sierra ile
by
dava
that
oldular
point
herhalde.
had become acquired by Vivendi, had worldwide distribution rights, but only for retail package product.
Vivendi was licensing Counter-Strike to cyber cafes. We went to Vivendi and said, hey, this is not a big deal. Just agree that this is outside of your license. And, we've spent a little bit on attorney's fees, just cover, some tens of thousands, just cover us for that. And we'll move on and just keep going. And they wouldn't do it. I think some people at Vivendi did not like the new deal that they had.
Vivendi. O dönemin Take-Two'su gibi bir şey Vivendi aslında.
I think some people at Vivendi did not like the new deal that they ended up signing. And I think there were some hurt feelings in some quarters about that deal. When we said, hey, the cyber cafe thing, you really can't do that. Coming on top of, a year negotiations and torturous negotiations, I think that just struck an angry chord. We ended up filing the lawsuit, but really just on this narrow thing of like, hey, court, will you go just read this language and say, are they outside the license or not? And Vivendi decided to go World War III.
We filed our case in Seattle, federal court in Seattle, and they hired a law firm to defend it, of course. There was some initial skirmishing about discovery. There were some disputes and motions that had to be decided by the judge, and those went all Valve's way. And then suddenly, the law firm disappeared.
Hepsi Valve'in istediği gibi gitti diyor orada.
They hired a big scary law firm from San Francisco. They thought, okay, Valve's had some success in this case, and so we need to change their mindset from we think we're going to be successful to we're going to be destroyed. The next thing we knew, here comes this big stack of counterclaims, everything from canceling the 2001 agreement to obtaining ownership of all the Half-Life IP, to keeping us from doing Steam, to you name it, where they included Scott and Julie Lynch and Gabe and Lisa Newell, his wife at that time, personally, as defendants.
And so it was kind of like, well, we're going to put Valve out of business, and then we're going to bankrupt the two of you. I think that was a lot of what they felt like was their path towards winning this fight.
They decided that it would have more effect and be scarier if process servers showed up at everybody's house in the night and a real bullshit move.
Bu arada yeni gelenler için şey yapıyorum. Şu anda gördüğümüz şey Half-Life'ın isim hakkı, IP, telif, royalty hakkı için Valve'le Vivendi arasında önceden Sierra'ydı, sonra Sierra'yı Vivendi alıyor. Hani nispeten yeni başarılı bir orta ölçekli firmayla bir medya devinin kapışması. Neden? Half-Life'ın isim hakkı, fiziksel satış hakkı zaten Vivendi'de. Ama bunun dijitali var, bunun Counter Strike'ı var, bunun spin-off'ları var. Şeyi var yani, hukuki süreci devam ediyor.
It's not a legal strategy. It's basically trying to intimidate you. In other words, they're saying not only are we going to take all this money from the company, but we're going to take money from you personally as well.
I can't think of another case when that happened.
They were certainly a lot bigger than we were. Vivendi was a multinational conglomerate. As compared to us, their funding was infinite. It felt very David versus Goliath.
Yeah. Publishers at that time in the industry were used to being able to bully developers, right? And so this was really about an assertion of power as much as it was optimizing for a financial outcome. The tactics that they were using were trying to just run us out of money, right? So they knew how much money we were making because they were doing retail distribution of our games. And so they were just trying to crank up our legal costs as just another way of draining resources from the company.
We were protected from that a lot internally, so we didn't have to think about it. They did a pretty good job of letting the team concentrate on what the team could do without worrying about the future of the company so much. I mean, that was my perspective.
So yeah, I definitely was not shielded from that. The lawsuit was something where it's like created all this uncertainty around whether the game's going to come out. Vivendi was definitely trying to use that as leverage. And so even if we finish the game, they're not going to let us release it.
There came a point where Gabe had pretty much used up his liquid assets. And he was like, you know, should I put the house on the market? And I was like,
evini satmaya kadar gelmiş bak çaresizlikten.
If...
Düşün yani Half-Life 1 çıkıyor. Başarılı bunlar. Para kazanıyor. İsim yapıyorlar. Ama öyle bir Half-Life 2 için işte o royalty hakları için, IP hakları için öyle bir noktaya geliyor ki hukuk mücadelesi. Gabe artık tüm karı tüketiyor. Microsoft'tan hani kazandığı kara gün akçelerini ki iyi paraymış onu tüketiyor. Evini satmaya kadar geliyor olay.
If we want to keep going.
The company was pretty close to going bankrupt. I was pretty close to going personally bankrupt. We went all in. It's like there was no money left. Like,
how anxious was that for you personally?
I don't know.
Povalsi kim haklı? Ya bizce
there's certain things that I'm kind of a weird person in a number of dimensions. Like I don't really think, oh, this is super scary. Like I don't have an emotional response to it. I just say, well, this is what we're doing. This is how, and you know, we'll see how it plays out. So I don't think it was super stressful to me, right? I mean, it didn't really bother me. Like I was diving in South Africa recently, and a shark tried to bite me a couple of times, and the people around me were way more freaked out than I was. I was like, oh, a shark's trying to bite me. I should get away from the shark. Whereas other people were having like, oh, a shark, it's trying to bite somebody, you know. And I just think that's how I'm wired. I don't think it's anything that speaks to my character or anything. It's like I just seem to not get particularly agitated around risk, which probably means I take on more risk than at times than most sane people would, which can be a positive, or you can wreck a bunch of other people's lives being in the neighborhood of your risk indifference.
Gabendeki soğuk kanlılığa bak ha. Vay be. Bir dakika çocuğum chat'e bakıyordum. Bir dakika. As the team worked most of the çalışanların hani çalışmalar devam ederken ekibin ne kadar maddi para sıkıntısı olduğuna dair hiçbir fikri yoktu çoğunun. Vivendi ile devam eden hukuki savaş Half-Life 2'nin launch'ına kadar, yayınlanmasına kadar da sürdü. Compliance ne demek bilmiyorum. Hiçbir fikrim yok.
They're this rigidly structured, you know, organization. Of course, they're going to have this really terse language for everything they do. You know, there's sort of an announcement to have this really terse language for every, you know, organization. Of course, they're going to have this really terse language.
Türk demiyor lan. Terse bir şey diyor, anlamıyorum.
Structured, you know, organization. Of course, they're going to have this really terse language for everything they do.
Anlamadım.
You know, there's sort of an announcer voice in that follows you around and kind of comments status, essentially, like how alert the world is to you. I sat down and just basically wrote a language for that, so that the soldiers and the Metro cops would have
uygun dil
jargon
anlamında
that they would use. Then I just used that to kind of encode. So that's where like anti-citizen 1 and things like that came from. Rather than saying the guy with the orange suit is causing trouble, you know, it would be, you know, anti-citizen 1 breach, scalpel something, sector something. So I basically just had this little dictionary. Then I overdid it on the vocal processing because they're all wearing these, you know, these masks, and I wanted it to sound like they're in a mask.
And it was very deliberate to never have to like shoot somebody that you can see their face. And like we didn't want you killing humans. I mean, the Metro cops are humans, but we covered all the faces up. I think it was all part of this calculated and deliberate way of saying like, look, games don't just have to be a certain way. There's so much room in what we can do here.
Well, the Metro Police and the Combine Soldiers share a lot of AI. And so there's an internal communication among them. And one of the things we did, both for the sake of difficulty and exposition, was limit the number of squad members that could be firing at the player at any given time. I think it's 2. So if you have a squad of 4, a guy who has an opportunity to shoot at the player grabs one of those slots if it's available and starts to shoot. And if someone else, another squad member wants to attack the player but no slots are available, they have to find the next best thing to do, which is I'll get out of the scene for a second, or I'll go reload, or I'll throw a grenade. And that was all stuff that we learned building half.
Tekrarlıyorum. Aynı anda yapı gereği 2 düşman ateş edebiliyor. Eğer 2'den fazlaysa o 3. ya da 4. ya hani cover savaşta görüyorsun ya, ateş etmek yerine gidiyor cover alıp reload ediyor ya da bomba atıyor. Ama aktif 2 kişiyle şey yapıyorsun, çatışıyorsun.
Load or I'll throw a grenade. And that was all stuff that we learned building Half-Life 1 and I think got a lot better at. Half-Life 2 used a node graph system, hand-placed nodes by developers in the levels would describe a really super low fidelity version of the environment for the AI to use.
It enabled the level designers to sort of inject and puppeteer a little bit the AIs in ways that were just easier for them to sort of be in control as opposed to having to grab an animator or a programmer to be able to get really cool things into the game.
Bu aradan kaçı mesela. Evet.
Floor is lava is like a really obvious piece of gameplay. Physics is really fun to manipulate. We just thought like, hey, you could build your own path. We'd already seen players who enjoyed moving stuff around, like building bridges and stuff, and like we don't have enough moments where like I just pick up a plank and lay it across a gap and walk across it. Like obvious stuff. We've barely done that in the whole game.
And the fact that you're laying stuff down on the floor means that the finesse required to do like precise placement wasn't necessary, right? You're like, I just want to place it here. And it doesn't matter the orientation, you just kind of jump on it and you do the next one and so on, right? And also like training was free. Like we didn't have to train it. It was like,
everyone got it
and it was like, oh, it's floor
Laszlo, the finest mind of his generation.
Bu eleman çok heyecanlı anlatıyor.
Exactly how to do it.
Someone's coming. You there! Stop where you are. Stay on the rocks. Don't step on the sand. It makes the antlions crazy. Laszlo, don't move. No. Help!
Bak. GG. Nimarim, teşekkür ediyorum. Hoş geldin.
Dear God.
Hoş geldin. Teşekkürler.
Poor Laszlo. The finest mind of his generation. To come to such an end. We were heading for the Vortigaunt camp, hoping to pick up some bug baits of these damn things and leave us alone. Without Laszlo, what's the point?
Ah be.
You just give these NPCs a name.
Panda hiçbir yerde salmamak deyince de ben.
And let the fans fill in their whole life story and give them something to play with.
The Freeman will have need of these pheropods on the paths ahead. Gather them now.
Nova Prospect and the Antlions with the pheromone balls were really fun because it lets you experience them in a different way, and it was another classic example of getting the most value out of technology investments that people could.
I remember the beach thing. The design intention was definitely to make it feel like a sort of D-Day beach landing. You didn't come from the water, but you're storming up towards these old gun emplacements, if I remember right, with Combine in them, and you're like invading the bunkers, and you're bringing your horde with you. You're overwhelming the defense, these in-place defenses.
Çok iyi ya bu.
It was surprising how much chaos you could get away with. Like
At arkana yaslan, Antlion'lar halletsin.
The Antlions spawned. We had difficulties from time to time with like design some choke point or challenge or whatever, and the Antlion flow rate wasn't enough.
Ama toprak ya da açık yer olduğunda saldırabiliyorlardı. Hatırlıyorum
onu. Like we had an atmospheric goal too. It wasn't just about like mechanically can you overcome this. You wanted to feel like your forces have stormed the walls. They're everywhere. There's chaos all around you. And so a lot of the tuning was about achieving that feeling, not just about mechanically getting past the enemies that we'd set.
Nova Prospect was different than a lot of the maps that I worked on, at least, is that in that we had some early art prototypes that were done. We have this whole concept of like zoo maps, we call them, which are basically like little art test scenes, how they would fit together, and some basic lighting.
But by the time our cabal got to Nova Prospect, we knew we were coming in with antlions and with bug bait. And so we already knew that a bunch of stuff was going to change because we had to support, you and your army of antlions fighting Combine soldiers. Antlions looked great whenever they were being shot by anyone.
Yes.
Like particle flecks flying off, and they always looked great. And so setting them up against Combine soldiers looked great. setting right to these turrets looked great.
Those were super fun snares to work on though, because having these ant lines that you could just use in any way you wanted was really fun. Like, and coming from the coast, like just the contrast of like shrinking everything down and then just piling it full of stuff was a lot of fun.
RTX versiyon çıktığında oynayacağız zaten Half-Life 2'yi. Ona şüpheniz olmasın.
I think it was Ted Backman's concept. I just thought,
Hem de arda böyle o hafta Half-Life 2'yi bitiririz episodlarıyla, öyle söyleyeyim size.
These guys are really fun to use.
I remember
Black Mesa'daki gibi 2 gün arayla oynayıp bitirmiştik.
A short list, things like he wanted flocking flyers and he wanted a moving guard tower, which was the first description of the Strider, was a mobile guard tower. So I saw that and immediately understood that, kind of orchestrating the enemies in that way, trying to get the most variety and the most breadth of shape and movement and experience was the correct way to move forward.
The design for that first Strider map
Half-Life Alyx oynayamıyorum maalesef.
I was really passionate about.
Kafam kaldırmıyor.
It was all about like running across and just getting like one shot in your tush.
Daha doğrusu beceremiyorum değil yani. VR'ı kaldıramıyorum, öyle söyleyeyim. Öyle bir sorun var. Blue Shift'te oynayacağız. Blue Shift'in şeyi bekliyoruz Musti. Birkaç gün içinde, sanırım Stalker'dan 2 ya da 3 gün evvel son şeyi çıkacak. Son episodu çıkacak ve full oynayacağız. 2 günde bitireceğiz Blue Shift'i. Sonra da Stalker'a geçeceğiz.
Right, just as you made it through.
Even just hearing the sound, the thump of them walking, like okay, there's like a boss nearby. You just see the legs walking by, but you can't see the body. Like there are so many things you can do with these guys.
Honestly, there were still people on the team, I think, that were still thinking that we were going to bomb. That people are just going to not be impressed.
When did you know it was going to be good?
Evet bir tane. Beraber izleyeceğiz.
Yeah, it seems like at some point there was an E3 demo that we got together that we didn't end up showing, but at least at that point it just felt like, oh wow, we actually have made something here.
We went through and made a bunch of demos for 2002, and everybody looked at them and was like, we're still not confident about this, and we don't think we've hit the bar, so we're not going to go at all. Like they had totally planned to go. And then when 2003 rolled around, I just remember everyone was still terrified. We were like, okay, how are we going to craft everything we've had into like a number of messages about what this product is? And like we came up with like the core theme of each one of these movies.
Oh, do be careful.
We didn't really understand at the time, I think, the embarrassment of riches that we had. We looked at it from two angles. One was a set of technical features, a sort of conceptual listing of things that we thought were important, like physics and things like that. And then the other side was content-based. What areas of the game were innovative, what areas of the story we thought were compelling, which characters we thought were worth people paying attention to. And so it was an interesting sort of marriage of which features and which content are the best showcase for all those things. A lot of what was in the demos was rendering technology, but I think the stuff that felt the strongest to most of us at the time was really physics-based.
Bak. İşte bunun kaliteli hali. Zaten az evvel de gördük de bunun 20 dakikalık kaliteli hali yayınladı. YouTube kanalında var.
At the time was really physics-based.
Bu vakte kadar böyle görüyorduk bu sahneleri.
So something looks like wood, then it sounds like wood, scrapes like wood, floats like it, and if you shoot it, it'll fragment like wood. To people at that time, it was pretty mind-blowing just to watch be able to pick things up, knock other things over, use things in a way that felt true to a three-dimensional reality. Maybe it's on those videos, I don't remember, but people were gasping and hitting the people next to them because they couldn't really believe what they were seeing on the screen. There's no limitation on the complexity of those interactions.
Baksana millet keyiften oluyor. Şaşkınlık ve keyif. İşte dediğim gibi. Shield'e yüzüyor ama varil çöküyor.
That person who was talking about a 486, like obviously it's just about like you must have a supercomputer behind like.
Buradaki espri şu arkadaşlar. Bahsettiği 486 dediği 486 DX hani Yani o dönem için artık eski kalmış, ya eski de değil, o dönemin standardı ama eskimeye başlayan standart. Çünkü Pentium 133'ler, 166'lar, Pentium 200 bilmem kaçlar MMX işlemciler falan çıkıyor ve ekran hatta bende de vardı. Pentium 166 MMX'ti galiba. 3DFX Voodoo ekran kartım falan vardı benim. Bayağı yalvarıp para biriktirip falan filan taktırmıştım. Neyse. Hani bu öyle bir fizik motoru ki, bu öyle şeyler yapıyor ki. Kardeşim bunu 486'da mı çalıştıracağız? Neyde çalıştıracağız? Hani oradaki espri o. Bu şey çıktığında da Crysis. Tamam iyi hoş çok güzel de grafikler, fizikler hangi bilgisayar çalıştıracak? Onun 20 sene önceki versiyonu bu. 486 esprisi.
E6. You know, that person who was talking about a 486, like it, obviously it's just about like you must have a supercomputer behind, like how are you even doing this? What is going on?
Ayağım düştü. Hasta.
The lines outside the booth became enormous, and it was the thing that it really distorted the rest of E3 because so many people were anxious to come see our demo.
And I remember seeing this absolutely enormous line with like some pretty well-known people in there, right? Miyamoto was in line for this stuff, and like
Will Wright, I think.
Yeah, Will Wright. There was a bunch of, and so then like after that was all done, like people on the team were just like, okay, we are ready. We can ship this game. We know we've got something good. It was really easy at that point. Like it felt like we were rolling the ball downhill
Until it leaked.
Until it leaked.
286 Yasmin. Aha. Meşhur hack. Bunu iyi izleyin. Bu çok yani oyun tarihinin en ünlü leak'i ve en ünlü faciası diyeyim. Alman bir hacker'ın Half-Life 2 dosyalarına sızıp daha oyun çıkmadan bütün konsept, demo, oynanabilir halini paylaşması. Aslında çocuk paylaşmıyor da çocuk dosyalara erişiyor. Sonra ortalık zaten karışıyor. Çünkü bir kere özür dilerim dediğim gibi biraz hastayım. Bir kere internete düştün mü bitti o iş. Bunun sonu hapse gidiyor öyle söyleyeyim. Ama neyse anlatsın da ben sonra şimdi spoiler olmasın. Aslında hapse de değil de neyse dinleyelim.
When something like this happens,
Spoiler
there's not like a big sign saying you've been hacked and somebody has access. Like you start off with something that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and you start pulling on that sweater thread.
Gabe's brother had a company called Tangis, and they made wearable computer stuff. So he was kind of winding it down, and he had one or two Unix servers that hosted the tangis.com domain name. Unfortunately, they were put inside the firewall and didn't have the latest Linux or whatever security updates on them. And so this kid from Germany was able to sort of exploit his way into that. He sat there for months, I think. He was able to sync the build, all the source code.
I was riffing ideas for, I think in particular, Counter-Strike. That information ended up on one of the internet chat rooms. And only two people knew the contents of that email. Of course, Gabe and myself. And I went to ITG and said, this could only have come from a leaked email. We got to figure out how that got out there.
But I remember at some point Gabe walking around, you know, like one of those moments like turn your computer off, something just happened.
Yeah, that's right.
Like I remember the video on my desk and he coming like turn your computer off, I think we're being hacked. And I was, what? Like yeah. I didn't know what to do. I actually did not know what to do.
I remember coming in that morning and figuring it out, and it just felt like someone had just punched me in the gut.
You know, it's like the bit in movies where like after an explosion, they'll have a scene where someone's like staggering around the street and everyone's like,
yeah.
What's this mean? Like, can we still keep working on the game? Yeah. Like, is someone just going to release the whole game tomorrow?
And I don't know if the guy who hacked it intended to, I think,
he showed it to friends.
He intended the wide distribution.
He showed it to friends and then one of his friends posted it somewhere.
Çok ilginç bir hikaye var çünkü sonunda yani eleman şey diyor. Abi ben sizi o kadar çok seviyorum ki yani merakımdan dayanamadım baktım falan filan. Ki o çocuk dağıtmıyor bu arada piyasaya. Ama işte yani internet.
Unfortunate.
Yeah.
Half-Life 2'nin build'i September 2003'te, Eylül 2003'te leaklendi. Tabii yıllarca beklenen bir oyunun fanları için.
And one of the things I think that's pretty interesting is how much the leak of the game, the hack of our network and the leak of the game, how much that kind of shattered that confidence.
It was like, you know, having a movie that you're working on be spoiled for the world. That's how it felt. Because we knew it would be hard for people to know that that existed and not go look at it all. It looked all broken to us and it just felt really demoralizing.
Oh man, I was seriously affected by that. I was pretty angry. So I don't know. It kind of affected me for a while. You know, having it called the beta when it was not even close to being a beta. Work in progress, you know. Wasn't really ready to be seen yet.
Normally the office is pretty vibrant and loud and people are riding scooters in the hallway and doing all sorts of stuff. Gabe's tube and throat singing, and it got very still and very quiet. I remember that. That was very eerie. That was the game that was going to make or break the company. We didn't know if we were going to have to go find jobs.
Not only did it show everybody that we were not anywhere near where we said we would be, but all the work that we had in progress, all the plans that we were making were just laid out bare. And so a lot of us just thought, oh, we're toast. We've worked so hard. Are we going to go bankrupt? And then all that while Scott Lynch and Gabe were being sued by Sierra, their wives being delivered subpoenas. And so it was a super dark time.
So there were two interesting threads going on. One was, traditional law enforcement intelligence agencies, and they were doing their thing and issuing subpoenas and seizing devices. And then we asked our community to help us out. And I think Axel Gembe started to realize that he was being tracked down by the community, right? Everything was being, essentially, it was an open source investigation. So you could see that they were getting closer. And that's when he reached out to me.
Axel Gembe işte Alman çocuk şey yapan. Neyse şimdi anlatacak onun için ben de dayanamıyorum da. Çünkü çok acayip bir hikaye yani.
Investigation. So you could see that they were getting closer. And that's when he reached out to me. Of course, I was insanely furious with him, but we ended up running this sort of scheme with him where I was like, oh, wow, you must be really good at security issues. We should have you come out and interview. And the FBI was going to arrest him when he got off the plane.
And then apparently the German police sweep in right as he's about to leave, because it turns out he's also guilty of a bunch of bank fraud and bank hacking and all that.
He had
kind
hacked
of
into a bunch of huge companies over there as well, and so they were already well aware of him.
How much it harmed us financially, or like how much the success of the game was harmed by that, very debatable. So it was hard for us to go through internally, but in the end, I wouldn't have wanted to have it be a whole like law enforcement debacle after that. It just, it wouldn't have really helped anyone.
And I'm not saying we should ever be lax about security, but like if we could survive that, like maybe, we'll survive anything, because at the end of the day, the special sauce was everything that happened between the moment of that leak and when we actually shipped. And if you look at that version of the game, it's just so not what the final game ended up being. And so even if our competition had all the source code and that executable, they're still not able to produce Half-Life 2 from it, because the company kept moving forward and the company was the interesting special sauce.
Şimdi şeye geliyor. Half-Life 2'de ekibin çoğu çalışırken bir yandan da Valve oyunculuğun gelecekteki oyun dağıtımcılığının geleceğini değiştirecek bir ürün üzerinde çalışıyordu. Evet, Steam. Burada şu küçük bilgiyi de ekleyeyim. Bu Gembe kardeşimiz, Axel Gembe işte bu Alman hacker kardeşimiz. Hakikaten şeye gidecek, tutuklanacak. Gabe Newell'la görüşmeye. Yani uçaktan indi gibi FBI alacak, sonra o Amerika'da da öttürürler adamı hani böyle bir şeyde. Alman polisi aslında çocuğun hayatını kurtarıyor. Çünkü Alman polisi yakalayınca şimdi Amerika'ya gitse Amerikan hukukunda yargılanacak. Pasaportuna el konulacak falan. İadesi olur olmaz. O çok apayrı prosedür. Belki yıllar sürecek. Almanya'da yakalanınca hakim karşısına çıkıyor. Hakim diyor ki tamam, sen genç, reşit değil bu arada. Ve reşit değilsin. Tamam, pişmansın. Verin buna community cezası. İçeride yatmıyor. Ama bilgisayarların şeylerine erişim konuluyor. İşte internette 5 yıl kadar mı ne internete erişimi, herhangi bir şekilde yazılım bilmem ne kısıtlanıyor. Bir de community, topluluk, hani dandik ceza var ya, onlardan veriliyor, çocuk yırtıyor. Ama çocuk o Gabe Newell çok üzerinde durmuyormuş da diyor. Ben sizi çok seviyorum. Ben Half-Life'ı Artık o kadar çok merak ediyorum ki delireceğim. Ben böyle bir bok yedim ama pişmanım. Ben sizi sevdiğimden yaptım. Hani geleyim size bir faydam olursa hani beni alın, çalışırız, röportaj falan filan. İsterseniz ben sizinle de çalışırım, parasız da çalışırım. Açıklarınızı kapatın falan. Çocuk kendi kafasında şey hani Half-Life'de Valve'de falan çalışabileceğine inanıyor hani şeyinden dolayı. Oysaki Gabe Newell dedi ya, ben stres anlarında çok da etkilenmem. Soğukkanlı bir şekilde FBI'ya, federallere çakacak çocuğu. Alman polisi işte hayatını kurtarıyor. Alman polisi alıyor, hakim de diyor ki tamam sen reşit değilsin, belli pişmansın falan filan, hadi salın bunu. Şimdi ne yapıyor bilmiyorum ki.
Gabe in particular, he had kind of a pencil sketch of an idea in his head of what would become Steam. But it was clear that Team Fortress Classic and then later Counter-Strike, it was fundamentally the thing that we were really attracted to was our ability to ship content directly to our customers. I mean, there was a set of business goals that ended up being part of Steam, but fundamentally it was a bunch of game development goals that it was servicing that were so attractive to us.
It was a very weird time. Like, I don't think people understand how many times we would go to people and say, no, you will be able to distribute software over the internet, and have people just say, no, it will never happen. I'm not talking about one or two people. I mean, like 99% of the companies we talked to said it will never happen. Your retail sales force will never let it happen. But also people would say users aren't gonna want this, right? People want physical copy. Like, there were so many bad faith arguments that were being made. Retail sales is not the goal, right? It's actually an impediment that it's somebody who sits between you and a customer.
And we ended up going out to finding this company called Applied Microsystems. So we ended up hiring...
Bunu sadece Half-Life 2 belgeseli olarak düşünmeyin. Aynı zamanda artık bu Half-Life 2'nin release süreciyle beraber işte hacklenmeden bahsetti, davalardan bahsetti. Şimdi artık Steam'den bahsediyor. Yani Half-Life 2 artı Steam belgeseli gibi. Valve'i günümüzdeki Valve yapan şey.
Most of the original Steam team from that other company to build initially this sort of in-game advertising stream.
Bu arada hani aranızda fark etmeyen varsa Valve Türkçe'de kullanıyor. Vana fıçık çevirdiğin şey Steam buhar. Vana çevir buhar. Vana buhar. Okay.
Model, but then there was the epiphany that, hey, it's just bits. Why don't we just download whole games this way? You guys go off and do it.
The decision to not only use Steam to ship Half-Life 2, but actually to require Steam, even in the versions that were purchased at retail in a box, was the most interesting decision of all those, because it turned out to be an incredibly important decision for the future of the company. And a lot of us were nervous, and a lot of the people who had been at Valve for a long time, since the very beginning, were the most nervous about that decision. And so it was one of the rare exceptions to our decision-making process usually, and Gabe had to really step in and say, no, actually we're doing it this way.
I remember coming to work in the morning, working on Half-Life 2, which meant that, you know, by the time you go home at night, me being a 24-year-old idiot, all I wanted to do was keep working on the game.
Sana VIP verdim abi, haberin olsun.
Making the game work on multiplayer, right? You know, mostly just working on prediction, like what would it feel like to have a gravity gun on a multiplayer setting, right? Getting physics objects to work. You know, it was just curiosity. Scott Dalton saw me working on it, and he's like, I'll make a map, and then we play. Put the map up, we started playing in the office in between, you know, builds of Half-Life 2, like playtest. And I remember Gabe walking by my desk, and I remember him going like, what's that? And I said, oh, it's Half-Life multiplayer. And he's like, show it to me tomorrow. And he just walked away.
I think that is one of the advantages of the general cost we always pay.
Hiç ben
ben
bu arada belki 10 dakika falan oynamışımdır ya ne bileyim yarım saat falan oynamışımdır Half-Life 2'nin deathmatch'ini. Hiç hani Half-Life 1 deathmatch'ine yüzlerce saat gömmüşümdür. Ama hiç Half-Life 2 deathmatch oynamadım. Oynayan da çok tanımadım bu arada. Evet, aristokratsın abi, hoş geldin. Bilmiyorum siz oynamış mıydınız ama
Half-Life 2 at the same time at that point. We're paying this continuous cost in Half-Life 2 for the fact that it's built upon an engine that's designed to do multiplayer.
Klozetle
But it
öldürmüş.
means that
Baksana
when you get
klozet
to this
atarak
later
öldürmüş.
point where you start asking, well, can we build multiplayer deathmatch out of this? Like the code's all sort of built upon a fundamentally a client-server sort of foundation.
Definitely the most entertaining thing that you could throw at somebody that happened to be scattered around the world was picking up a toilet and hurling it at someone's head, and then having that show up in the upper right corner of your screen with name, toilet name, was very satisfying.
Bunu denesek mi
I
bir
was
ara ya?
also selfishly trying to get the game ported to multiplayer. So
Ama
then
sadece
we can use
tuvaletle
the tools,
öldüreceğiz
the
birbirimizi.
SDK ready to go. Like it meant like mod makers could just immediately
Bunu
start
ben
making multiplayer game mods.
Bir izleyici
rather than waiting
gaming
for us to
bir
do it or
modları alalım,
someone
beraber
else to
bir
pick it up.
yapalım. Tuvalet fırlatalım.
We were so heads down working on what we were working on, and we didn't really get a chance to play the train station.
I remember that was one of the lessons that came away from Half-Life 1 is like, we need to be building these games backwards in a sense. The first thing we're going to put in front of people is the thing we built when we're as good as we can be at it. You know, we know our tools and things like that. And a lot of the anxiety over, are we building a good game, was behind us. And I felt really confident, yeah, we're building a really good game.
Olur olur, tuvaletle öldürmece yayını yapacağız. End of the line, yolun sonu.
We're entering the Gare d'Austerlitz. And this train station is very important because it's one of the main inspirations for the train station of City 17,
Evet, başta
where
söylediğiniz
the
şey.
player starts. The reason why I'm using a Parisian station produced by Eiffel, who did the Eiffel Tower, is that there's an identical station in Budapest.
Train station's the last bit we worked on, right?
Yeah.
And we always want to build the start of the game late, as late as we can, because we understand our game at that point.
In general, the train station was a really interesting problem because it was basically one big choreo sequence intended to deliver atmosphere and story and background and sort of set your expectations for the world.
We let the level designers, who were really good at this stuff, figure out what was a good experience. And then we were kind of always there to provide dialogue, acting, stuff like this guy.
I think it was pretty clear, too, that we wanted to provide incentive to the player at this point. About how people were being mistreated, about how bad the situation was here, and kind of start to trigger that righteous indignation early.
All this stuff is fun to look at, but you just assume it doesn't move and you can't interact with it, you can't pick it up. Because all the stuff we're going to do later with the gravity gun and everything, like, first we got to start just mundane stuff like that food, you know, that little empty bit of food.
I mean, it happens like the moment you leave the train, wind comes and blows all the trash away.
Doing it everywhere.
You can see the vortigons sweeping. So like, guy pushing it on the cases, on the
and all those
suitcases.
things fall off.
Yeah,
and
so
you can pick those up and.
We were like, if it doesn't have to be bolted
Heyecanlı
down,
abim, lafını kesme
just
adam.
make sure that it gets knocked
It
over.
can move.
This guy looks vaguely familiar. There's something about the way he walks.
It's like a beer drinker.
Who would have thought Barney has the capacity to go undercover, right? Like that seemed to be, you know, above his pay grade, above his intelligence pay grade from the get-go.
Look at that beautiful animation.
Assassin hoş
But
geldin.
where'd his hat go? It's gone. Something is not right here.
Magical combine tech.
We were trying to figure out how to get people to figure out how to pick up things and do things. And we were all just sitting around, because we've been having this problem for weeks, racking our brains, and I think Robin had a Coke can on his desk. And at some point I got frustrated, and I smacked it off his desk. I'm like, well, you pick that up then. And everyone kind of sat around, I was like,
I just found it just an immensely satisfying piece of like a storytelling and world setting. You know, we got to use our physics tools and the choreo tools, and all of those things blended together into
Çok
this
güzel
very
işte.
simple,
Yine çevresel
clean
anlatım.
moment.
Like the can cup is perfect also because while it's teaching you how to
En güzel tutorial işte.
objects, it's also telling you something about the combine themselves and the metro cups,
and your relationship.
right? Yeah, so like it was a twofer, right? We got those two at the same time.
Physics is going to be a big part of our game. By
Şunu
the time you
RTX'de
let
harbi
train
merak
station
ediyorum ya.
as a player, like,
Tekrar
you
oynamak için
understood
ideal
that.
olacak
And
RTX
you come to
gelince.
appreciate it, because we couldn't wait until you got to Ravenholm before you found out how awesome physics is. If you'd had any kind of weapon, I think they would have had to kill you. And we found the longer we sort of held that away from ourselves, the more we were forced to come up with stuff that was still entertaining that you could do. Like the raid is a whole, you know, in the tenements, is a whole thing that could work because the player could only run.
We don't very often force the player into a very specific set of actions. That's one of the few times that we had to learn to really corral the player, and I think it ended up being pretty successful. Like, I think the consequences for sort of not following on the clear path were quick and efficient.
Get in here, quick! Keep moving, head for the roof! So when you build a world, I start with infrastructure. What's really interesting for me is what is not visible to the tourist, which is the courtyard, the backyard, the shafts and the smokestacks and the wires. And every city has this whole existence, and you know, people are usually blind to it, and we tend to look at storefronts, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it came down to art direction. I mean, Victor was very familiar with all that, the look and feel. You know, there was certain patterns and certain, iconic shapes that anybody who lived there could pick up on. You know, they're like, oh yeah, my grandmother had that dress, or whatever. And my parents are from Argentina, and so they have that kind of sensibility, but a lot of it came down to the reference gathering, which was from Bulgaria, from Paris.
We have these
Işıklar, şeyler birebir neredeyse. Birebir, evet.
Buildings that again have back courtyards. They have big staircases. They have attic spaces, cellar spaces, and the apartments have big windows and thick walls. So this was providing already a lot of context for people who can hide in these apartments.
Help me! Stop! We didn't do anything!
Hey.
They'll be looking for you now. You'd better run.
I remember that we wanted to have the player see proof that the Combine were evil people, not that they were gray in any way, that they were objectively the bad guys. And then we had it to where you go upstairs, and then we really carefully and intentionally framed the reveal of the world to where you see the Citadel front and center, and it's clearly in an alert state.
The four of us, the City 17 Cabal, we'd done City 17, which is a bunch of hard problems. We'd done Ravenholm, which is a different set of hard problems. We were like, I don't know, 4 months from trying to lock down the game or something. I mean, it was really late. I may have the dates wrong, but it was really late. And there was a bunch of gameplay that was in there that hadn't really received a lot of like development.
We were coming from working with pretty much every tool in the game in C17 to going back to basically you have a pistol and metric ops. Not much really. So John and I absolutely love exploding barrels, so we just used them absolutely everywhere we could. We set them up. We loved ragdoll magnets and physics. It's just one of my favorite tools. It's basically you have a point in space that when a character dies, they turn into a ragdoll, and then you have a ragdoll magnet that says, okay, if there is any ragdoll in this radius, pull towards me, and then you can give it a
Bez bebek dediğin ragdoll anladınız yani.
If there is any ragdoll in this radius, pull towards me, and then you can give it a strength. And so if somebody dies in an especially dramatic location, you can have an especially dramatic death. And we just use that absolutely everywhere. I mean, you can use it just to pull someone directly down. So in that bridge, the train bridge, I put magnets directly beneath their feet, so it looks like they just, like the planks beneath their feet broke and they just fell directly down. I mean, they died from a broken plank, which doesn't make any sense, but they looked pretty cool. It was so orchestrated, I guess, because we didn't want it to, like, we didn't really have a lot of time to have a lot of bugs come out of it.
Ben burada hiç adamlara sıkmıyordum zaten. Direkt patlayıcılara sıkıyorum.
You know, our team was the one that did the Citadel. You know how I said that there was multiple passes on the product over the course of the thing? Well, Citadel had almost no pass. And we were thinking about Street War, and we were like, well, we just had like this incredibly intense, you know, Strider fight. How are we going to outdo that, especially when we only got a month to do this thing? We then came up with the idea of like, well, what if we made this just be your god, and this is the reward? You've won the game. Enjoy. We're going to like break all the rules and let you be god for a little bit.
picking up
evet
the
ya.
enemies as ragdolls and throwing them around really came out of that development tool because you could pick them up and
Bunda
move them
adamı
around.
adamla
People were
dövdüğümüz
like, I don't know,
şeyler.
that's pretty fun. Why
Kapışmalar.
can't we do that in the game?
It was either a week or a day. It was
Burada top
incredibly
çekip
quick.
top atıyorduk. Adamları da
I had
adamla
every single
dövüyorduk.
mechanic of
Adam
the
fırlatıyorduk.
Citadel mocked up. The combat ball was actually a very, very heavy watermelon that would bounce around and eventually break up. I had spikes in the wall that you could skewer them on. We had electric fields that you can throw them in. We had the zero-G fields that they would get stuck in. And we had ripping off the machines off the walls. All that stuff all came together within an incredibly short period of time, just a couple days. Very shortly after that, people were like, we were having a real hard time with the AR-2's alt fire. So maybe we'll just steal this because it's kind of cool and we'll bring it earlier in the game. Game development never does this. It never just materializes out of nothing in that short a time,
Evet,
and
bu
it's
arada
just
Half-Life 2
something
RTX
everybody's
çıksın,
excited
istiyoruz.
and happy about, and it just it felt really good to be a part of that.
Evet, döndük mü gene Steam'e? Ha evet. İşte ekip Half-Life 2 üzerine hani onu release etme üzerine çalışırken stüdyo bu şey yüzünden, davalar yüzünden maddi anlamda büyük sıkıntıdaydı. Kanıyor idi.
I started working on trying to find another source of funding to keep Valve going. I started working on a deal with a big publisher that was for Counter-Strike 2. So we're right there, ready to sign. We're really kind of running on fumes at that point, and then get a phone call and they're like, yeah, we changed our mind, we're not doing the deal. I remember one conversation with Gabe.
Bak o zaman Counter-Strike 2 çıkabilirmiş. Şu andaki CS2 bundan 20 sene, 24 sene önce de çıkabilirmiş arkadaşlar aynı isimde. Ama anlaşmadan caymışlar.
Which is he was like, so how fucked are we? And I was like, well, we're kind of screwed. We could probably reformat everything that we're doing, but it means we'd lay off people. And we still had the huge uncertainty of what is going to happen in the lawsuit. Immediately started chasing another publisher and were able to get a deal done with another publisher for Counter-Strike 2. When we got the deal done, Gabe at that point was super into knives. And as the deal gift for the parties, he built a knife that was inscribed Counter-Strike 2. Oh. And so the deal structure was, after we ship Half-Life 2, if you decide that you don't want to keep moving forward, then you can just decide to terminate the deal and we'll pay the money back. That ended up happening.
Evet.
So maybe a good choice because it took us a long time to ship Counter-Strike 2. So that we got done in probably May of 2003. And then through some more depositions, Vivendi figured out that we had gotten this new infusion of capital and kind of lost their mind trying to figure out how did that happen, because it was...
Burada şöyle bir şey var arkadaşlar. Amerikan hukukunda eğer maddi anlamda karşındakinden güçlüysen, haklı haksız olmak önemli değil bu arada. Yani tabii ki sonunda iki taraf da kazanmak istiyor da. Ama eğer karşındaki maddi anlamda davayı sürdüremeyecek konuma getirirsen, pes ettirirsen yine kazanmış oluyorsun. Çünkü bu defa üstünlüğünü ele geçirmiş oluyorsun. Karşı tarafın avukatları ya da kendini savunma gücü bittiği zaman ne yapacak? Yani çıkıp kendini mi savunacak? Savunmaya çalışsa bile olmayacak o iş. Ve otomatik olarak anlaşma yoluna gitmek zorunda kalacak. Anlaşmada nedir? İşte tüm istediklerini vermek ya da davayı kaybetmek. Ama bu Counter-Strike 2 tırnak içinde söyledim. Bu anlaşma sayesinde giren para Vivendi'ye siktir bunlar para buldu, ne olacak dedirtiyor.
And kind of lost their mind trying to figure out how did that happen, because it was clearly part of their strategy was running us out of money.
But what we decided was, hey, let's focus on the real nub of this and the thing that's going to lead to a resolution. Getting the judge to decide that we were right about the cyber cafe business, and also to decide that we were right that if you were distributing these properties without a license, that's copyright infringement. We had asked for information about what they were doing in Asia, including Korea, and they, I think, to try to make our lives more difficult, produced a big chunk of documents in Korean, that were in Korean. I mean, everything from email to contracts to you name it.
And one of the things they were doing is just dumping huge amounts of discovery on it to force us to go and just have somebody go and look through it. It's like, oh, look, they ordered sandwiches again, right? It has nothing to do with the lawsuit. It's just an attempt to overwhelm us with tens of millions of pages of documents on the assumption that there's nothing in it that will be particularly problematic for their case. That will eventually just we'll either spend a bunch of money, which plays into their hands, or we'll just eventually give up because it's finding a needle in the haystack. And then we found the needle in the haystack, and that changed things quite dramatically.
Haystack dediği saman yığını. Saman yığınında bulduk needle'ı, iğneyi.
It just so happened that there was an intern, summer associate, who was a native Korean speaker. And I said, Andrew, hey, can you look at...
Powalsi, o halde biz 2000'lerde nasıl CS1... Abi bizim oynadığımız bütün Counter Strike'lar kopyaydı. O zaman Türkiye'de orijinal oyun diye bir şey yoktu. Ama Amerika, Kore vesaire gibi ülkeler için öyle bir şey yok. Orada lisans. Hatta şu anda Riot yapıyor. Dediğim gibi kusura bakmayın hastayım biraz. Riot yapıyor. Ne yapıyor? Kafelerle anlaşma yapıyor. Onlara işte bütün karakterler açık ya da bir miktar karakter açık hesaplar veriyor ki gelenler rahat rahat istediği karakterle oynayabilsin. Lisans veriyor yani. Karşılığında belli bir telif ücreti alıyor. Aynı şey Vivendi Counter Strike üzerinden Amerika'da yapıyordu. Bunlar da diyor ki hayır o bizim hakkımız. Aynı zamanda da oyunlarımızı biz sıçarım fizikselini dijital olarak da dağıtacağız davası.
Who was a native Korean speaker. And I said, Andrew, hey, can you look at this pile here and can you just tell me what's in there?
I would guess that particular intern probably went through a couple thousand documents that day, and only one was consequential.
And they said, well, there's these other emails between these vice presidents where one says something like, hey, we destroyed those Valve documents like you asked.
Uh-huh.
And I said, are you sure it says that? And I said, yeah, that's what it says. And so, of course, that led to a conversation between me and the lawyer for their side about, hey, it looks like
böyle bir cümle bulduk kardeşim, evrakları yok ediyormuşsunuz.
They wrote back and said, you're out of your mind. Whoever translated doesn't know what they're talking about. And I talked to Andrew again. I said, well, it looks like we're going to have a kind of a fight about this. We're going to need an affidavit from you about your translation. Can you tell me a little bit about your Korean skills? He goes, well, I'm a native speaker. At UCLA, I majored in Korean language studies. And I said, that's good. That sounds like we're in good shape.
The assistant general manager in Korea sending the letter to the general manager of Korea saying, I have destroyed those documents related to the Valve case as directed, which I think is one of Carl's happiest moments as a lawyer in his entire career. Just like stuff like this never, ever happens.
I did a lot of lawsuits for a long time. I never saw anything like that. Never. Maybe there was document destruction that couldn't be proved, but that was like, we're talking about it in writing. I'd never seen that before.
At that point, Judge Zilli said, all matters of fact are now, according to Valve, you don't get to contest any of those. Now we're just discussing how much you're going to have to pay and what the damages are.
And Gabe was still pretty mad. He was mad. He really didn't want to settle. He was mad enough that he wanted to keep going. But I remember sitting down with Carl and having a conversation with Carl, and I was like, so Carl, what do you think? Should we settle at this point? Is the right number? And he was like, well, there's this old saying, there's a difference between being a pig and a hog.
Yani domuzla domuz olmak, hani normal domuzla yaban domuzu anlamında fark
Carl
vardır.
was done with the deposition, and that was the only question I asked him to ask that particular witness was, is Half-Life 2 being replicated and shipped to retailers? He said yes. And that the relief was, hey, no matter what, at least the game's going to get out to people, which is kind of that's a pretty unusual way to find out from your publisher that they're shipping your game to retail.
Half-Life Kasım 16 2004'te oldu. Yayınlandı. 39 Game of the Year ödülü.
I kind of been thinking about this
for the last few days, and what if there was one thing that I can point to that made us successful over that development period, and I think that it was really this culture that Gabe created, where we were hiring people that were senior enough to be managers, but also passionate enough to still be individual contributors. They were willing to stake their credibility and their name on these big features, and sometimes spend years working on those features.
Yeah, and it was like 6-7 days a week, 10 to 14 hours a day.
It wasn't always, I would say, a good 18 months at least, but a lot of good memories though. I mean, everyone in that room has such great sense of humor. Like we knew each other's sense of humor, we trusted each other, we respected each other enough that like we could rib each other without like stepping on each other's toes and stuff, and it just worked pretty well.
It was just bigger, more pressure, but and I think that seriousness in some ways, there's still humor, but that seriousness kind of infuses into the game. You feel it's a heavier game.
It's the most cohesive product feeling I can think of at scale that we've done as a company. The whole company was just aligned and got it done.
I think back on this experience, and it was a really hard time, but I feel super grateful because we were supported to make the very best game that we possibly could, and given the time to do it, we're going to ship it when it's done, even when we made unreasonable promises about when that might be in advance. And it was also at a time before the game industry was quite as specialized as it is now, where people got to wear multiple hats and contribute in all these different ways. So it was a rare life experience, and I'm really grateful to have been part of it.
Ve oyun kapanış içinde episodlar. Ha tabii. Bak işte. Şunu niye yapıyorsun göt? Bak bu götlüktür. Bunu bak kızdım şimdi. Hayır yapmayacaksın, niye umut veriyorsun pislik herif. Soldaki arkadaşlar episod 1. Ortadaki episod 2. Sağda şimdi konsept çizimle buzlu bir yerde işte Borealis şeyinde geçen Strider'la bir tane elemanın kapıştığı ya da işte şey yaptığı belli ki episod 3'ü ima eden bir görsel var. Göt. Niye yapıyorsun? Çıkarmazsan şerefsizsin sen. Alçak bir puştun sen Valve. Bunu yapma. Bak. Bunu yapma. İnsanlara ümit verme kardeşim. İt. Çıkarmayacaksan ümit verme. Kızdım. Zaten hastayım. Gazım var. Terliyorum.
Yeah, man, part of the fallout of Half-Life 2 shipping was the realization that we can't do 6-year-long bet the whole company bets over and over again, and if we get it wrong one time, we're a big crater in the ground, as Gabe would say. And so we started to think about episodic releases.
The first idea when they pitched it to us, like, we're going to do this episode of content, we'll do one every how much? 12 months?
Yeah, we were going to have like alternating
year.
teams coming out every year and a half, something like that.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, this is neat. But then, yeah, it just got out of hand.
So when they decided to start playing with episodic content, the promise for me that I felt was we can build smaller pieces, denser pieces faster, and we know what we're doing. We're going to be really good at this.
So a lot of it was like, do more with less, like keep a bunch of the existing stuff and retweak it to make some new interesting scenario. Like probably the biggest real new thing for episode 1 as far as technology was just having Alex with you throughout the entire thing and having her behave in a way that was believable and fun. She's with you for a few distinct parts in Half-Life 2, but they're always pretty heavily scripted and not really in combat. Having her there and able to actually be a useful companion, so there's a lot of little tricks that we did to try to make that as fun as possible for players. She doesn't have supernatural knowledge. She's not like just finding things without you lighting them up. But like if you throw a flare out or you look at them with the flashlight, it's like, okay, she's going to go for that target because she can see it.
We were like cranking on that, and it took forever. Like we were not just partying, hanging out.
No, I was pretty much crunched that whole project.
Yeah, we were crunch mode. And then same thing with episode 2.
We started at the same time as episode 1, and so we ran for an extra year that way, which allowed us to stretch and push more.
So the hunters were initially something that we wanted to have a more sort of frenetic pursuit built into the design of the character. So it was really focused on, at the time, creating a creature that could follow the player into more types of spaces.
One of the questions was, how do we keep Alex out of your way during this really intense, high-action scene where the player has agency to make whatever decision they want about where they want to be inside the house and that sort of thing. And that's when we got the idea to have her sort of camp out by a window, and she would fire out the window and let you know if she saw any hunters or soldiers out that window. And if the player started to spend time at that window, she would find another one to go be at.
I mean, so Dario Casali was trying to create this final fight in episode 2.
The Striders always reminded me of AT-ATs in Empire Strikes Back.
Evet, doğru.
And of course we wanted something fresh because...
Tam çevirisi Empire Strike, yani Star Wars'taki şu AT savaşçılar var ya, uzun bacaklı, tam bu tip yani. Star Wars izleyenler bilecektir. Bunun mekanik versiyonu düşünün.
Empire Strikes Back. Of course we wanted something fresh because just rocketing a ton of Striders wasn't going to be a bit repetitive after a while. So that's when we started collaborating, talking about the Magnuson device and the hunters and how would those all come together to make this sort of an overwhelming 25-30 minute battle set piece.
The citizens and the hunters and to a lesser extent the Strider are all secretly in cahoots to create this tension.
Ay bu alçaklar ya.
What we always wanted was
Neydi bunlar?
gotten the Magnuson device
Unutma,
on
Hunter
the last
mıydı?
guy.
Neydi?
Are you going to be able to shoot it? Oh my God, the rocket's going to be destroyed, and then boom, you hit it, so that when everyone comes out running, you really feel heroic.
You have the car and you have a big space, and you're not guided anyway. You have to go and take care of this threat in a way that you think is best. I think it pays off. It makes the player feel like, I did this myself. I wasn't guided by a level designer at all, because we give them so many options, right? You can kill the hunters with driving the car into them. You can pick up a log and throw at them. You can pick up a Magnuson device and throw it too soon, and they'll shoot it down. You have to learn, I have to kill the hunters first. You can use rockets to kill the hunters. You have options, and you have time and you have space, but we dial the tension and the pacing up pretty slowly over time.
It is pretty cool, all the kind of cinematic destruction stuff that happens in there.
It was so hideously faked, because basically we would send a Strider who would do that sort of the low scuttling run, and he would just sit there and wait, just staring at this building until the player could see the Strider plus the building.
Framed up
he would literally sit there forever. But we dial the tension and the pacing up pretty slowly over time. The playtests we like the most is when the Strider's, he's getting ready to shoot the rocket, and then the last Magnuson device goes off, and then he's done.
Vay, kendini havaya uçurdu.
Nice one, Freeman! We did it! We held them off!
People were failing left and right, and the team was calling for the map to be cut.
Wow, I took a lot of heat for that.
And
both of us did.
Yeah, we had to see it through.
We were going to do an arc of 3, of course, because that's just how you think of stories in those terms.
Evet kardeşim.
And then you want the high point to come at the end of the second one. And Gabe at one point saying, "Who's the important character you're going to kill?" I'm like, Lamar is going down. This is going to be it. I want episode 2 to end with Lamar floating into space and everyone cries. And Gabe's like, that's not good enough.
No!
The episodes were, a lot of that was an experiment on what's the right amount of episode. Episode 2 was longer than episode 1 and bigger, and people liked that better. But
it also took longer.
It took longer to make, and people didn't like it as much as they liked Half-Life or Half-Life 2. Kind of scope, right?
Yok oğlum, siz yapın, biz beğendik ya.
Are we solving a lot of problems here, or
fark etmez.
Making a sideways trade-off? I think that's maybe the way I felt about it.
Even into episode 3, I still don't know what that would have been if we'd built it, because it hadn't been built. That was the feeling of excitement of something I can't even imagine is going to happen as a team. I was not imposing a top-down, this is what we must do to tell our very important tale.
You know, it's more like, oh, we have new features? Like, how do we use, what kind of story can we do with these now?
Well, I worked on episode 3, and I was working on this gun called the ice gun that basically let you create amorphous shapes out of ice. So you could like raise a little ice wall in front of yourself. It would be attached to the floor, and then the Combine soldiers could shoot holes in it, and it would shatter and break like kind of like glass, I guess. So that was the primary mode of you could build ledges for yourself to get down, you know, cliff faces. It had another mode that was like a kind of like a Silver Surfer mode where you would extrude the ice in front of yourself and then run along it and use it to cross gaps, go over chasms and things like that. What else do we have? It was set in the Arctic because it was around, centered around Borealis.
I remember the little blobby, squishy.
Oh yeah. Brian was working on the blobs. So we had the iso surfaces that we ended up using in Portal for the paint. So we had that as a
Portal'da kullanmışlar bunları
It was a
da.
blob enemy.
Boşa gitmesin
and
diye.
it could change its shape, and you could choreograph its shapes with some content tools. And then it could also split into little hoppy blobs that could, they were almost like little head crabby things, but they were little splats that would hop around. And we were doing all kinds of stuff with that. It could pass through grates.
You know, you could get more gameplay out of something where you had maybe a couple of creatures with simpler behaviors.
Adamların derdi sadece episode yapmak değil. Hani öyle bir yenilik getirelim ki ayrı bir oyun olsun, ayrı bir oynanış sunsun, ayrı bir deneyim sunsun. Ha, bu zımbırtıyı beğenmedim, o ayrı.
We worked on a peer-to-peer thing. We were all gonna, what can we do? What do you think would be cool?
Evet,
It was still a collection of like playable levels in no particular order, and a collection of story beats and story concepts. And we were still like, probably another 6 months we would have had a critical mass of like mechanics, and then start putting them in a timeline. I think probably a year and a half easily, depending on how ambitious we got. Could have been, 2.5 more years. Yeah.
Probably. It's hard to be a lot less than 2 years.
Yeah, I think we were 6 months in on it when we moved to Left 4 Dead. I don't know, we were moving at a pretty brisk pace too.
Episode 3'ü bırakıp Left 4 Dead'e geçiyorlar.
We needed to go much bigger on episode 3
Left 4 Dead de müthiş bir şeydi yani.
Because I don't know if this is the right way to describe it, but Element 50,
Hikaye öyle bırakılır mı
I
be
think we had
kardeşim
really
yani?
explored a lot of what made sense in the Half-Life universe and setting.
Arcane was building the Ravenholm game, and even they were having trouble doing cool new stuff with this tool set. And like, if those guys can't figure out a bunch of cool stuff to do with this, I think we're running out of fuel.
Episode 3 is coming along. It's like, well, what's the new big thing here? It's got to be bigger than all the stuff we just did. Even episode 2, and it's like, oh my god, it just becomes.
Are we allowed to cry in this documentary? That's what I want to know.
Left 4 Dead needed kind of an all-hands-on sort of an effort to ship, and so we put down Ep 3 to go help Left 4 Dead, and it was a really tight shipping schedule, and it required a lot of work from everybody to get out the door, and it was worth it. I mean, it was.
Yeah, Left 4 Dead came out.
Left 4 Dead came out great, but it took long enough, and this is the tragic and almost comical thing about it, was it took long enough that then by the time we considered going back to episode 3, the argument was made like, well, we missed it. It's too late now, and we really need to make a new engine and to continue the Half-Life series and all that. And now that just seems, in hindsight, so wrong.
Evet.
We could have definitely gone back and spent 2 years to make episode 3.
And you can't get lazy and say, oh, we're moving the story forward. That's copping out of your obligation to gamers, right? Yes, of course they love the story. They love many, many aspects of it. But sort of saying that your reason to do it is because people want to know what happens next. We could have shipped it. Like, it wouldn't have been that hard. The failure was, my personal failure was being stumped. Like, I couldn't figure out why doing episode 3 was pushing anything forward.
But yeah, I mean, some of those people made Left 4 Dead 2 and then Portal 2. So
yeah, we did other things instead.
It's not like
Hayır, yaptıkları diğer şeyler de
Right.
Çok başarılı ama.
Players like they may have gotten that and
given up something
else. Yeah. So it's
Yine
hard to
de
say.
yani.
But a lot of us have been doing Half-Life for 8+ years.
We saw a bunch of really compelling reasons to go explore more multiplayer-based projects too, because not only just what customers were doing, but internally, we found ourselves wanting to play a lot of multiplayers.
It sounds silly to say it because we're a relatively big company that has a bunch of stuff, but we're not that many people. There's 300 something people here, and so we're working on a bunch of different projects, and it's like, people are passionate about Portal, people are passionate about TF, people are passionate about Left 4 Dead and Half-Life and CS and Dota, Deadlock. I mean, there's a lot of things there, and I also work on our hardware, so I've worked on Steam Deck and the original Steam controller and a tiny bit on VR. Unfortunately, for any decision we make, somebody is going to be unhappy, but hopefully we're making a bunch of people happy with the choices we do make.
If it weren't for the episodes, there'd be no such thing as Dota. And I know that sounds really weird, but it was the things that we learned in developing the episodes that led to, Team Fortress, to more rapid updates.
I think everybody that worked on Half-Life misses the working on that thing, but it's also hard not to be like, man, I've seen every way that you can fight an antlion or, whatever. And so you want to get some space away from it until you can come back to it with fresh eyes.
Yani biraz kendi vicdanlarını temizleme şeyine döndü böyle. Muhabbetine döndü. Tamam, yenilikler de deneyelim. Tabii ki zaten çok başarılı oyunları var ondan sonra ama her an dönme fırsatları varken de yani daha ne yapabilirdik bilemiyoruz. Şimdi sırf oyuncular da mutlu olsun diye de laf olsun diye de Episodic tabii ki laf olsun diye yapmayacaksın yani. Bilemiyorum. Hani kendi vicdanlarını temizleme şeyi böyle. Bir belgesel yapalım da sonunda işte bize söylemesinler.
VR being a vehicle for
Gelmez abi.
Because
adam kendi söylüyor. Multiplayer oyunlar yapmak istiyoruz. Multiplayer oyunların hepsi en başında söyledim. Live service ya da Episodic ya da Battle Pass bilmem ne yani. Bunların hepsi gelir kalemi ve doğal olarak başarılı olan her projede şeylerini de alıyorlar. Primlerini de alıyorlar. Şu anda orijinal ekibin tamamı $1 milyon zaten.
it was easy to think about VR being a vehicle for Half-Life because that was a big technological innovation,
VR,
kind of a core reason for that product's existence. And I think one of the things we have internally tended to attach to the Half-Life IP is innovation. Gameplay innovation is oftentimes enabled by a technological innovation. Clearly there was a ton in Half-Life 1 and 2. And so yeah, it's an interesting challenge moving forward to think about what that means for future Half-Life stuff, for sure.
The ending of Half-Life Alyx is somewhat a self-critical realization, so that was super satisfying, and all credit to the people who are specifically involved in that decision and those sets of designs. I think that Half-Life represents a tool we have and promises made to customers to capitalize on innovation and opportunities to build game experiences that haven't been involved previously. And I think that there are no shortage of those opportunities facing us as an industry right now.
Gabe çok enteresan bir adam ya. Ama neler yaşadığını da öğrenmiş olduk yani.
No fiddlesticks. What now?
Bu arada bunu yapan belgeseli yapan adam da Danny O'Diver No Clip. YouTube'da No Clip. Ona yaptırmaları da güzel olmuş ha. Çünkü işin hakkını fazlasıyla veren müthiş bir YouTuber. Böyle de bir şeyimiz vardı. Böyle de bir şeyler yaşandı. Evet. Evet. Ya. Ne oldu lan? Raid mi geldi? Raid geldi de haberim mi yok? Bir anda bir şey gösteriyor. Yani burada şöyle Gabe abimi alayım kadraja. Dur.
Promises made.
Böyle dursun. Ya buradaki üzücü olan şey artık Episode 3'ün yani gelmeyeceğini bilmemiz. Gelme ihtimali tabii ki var. Sonuçta Half-Life'ı yapan ekip bir arada oldukça ya da nasıl söyleyeyim Valve'de bir ekibin içinde Half-Life ateşi yandıkça Bu gayet de gerçekleşebilecek bir şey. Tekrar dönelim, edelim. Hani insanlar bunu, sadece insanların istemesi değil. İnsanlar yıllardır bunu bekliyor. Ama bunu Valve'in kendinin de istemesi lazım. Şu anda Gabe abim bir vicdan temizliği yaptı. Özetle diyor ki biz Half-Life'ı her zaman, yani laf olsun diye hiçbir zaman Half-Life yapmadık. Doğru. Bir de efsaneydi. Getirdiği sektöre kattıklarıyla. 2 getirdiği yeniliklerle, fizik motoruyla efsaneydi. Half-Life Alyx VR'ı ben oynamasam bile şey biliyorum yani. En başarılı VR oyunu açık ara. Yani hep sonra spin-off oyunlar işte Portal'lar bilmem neler. Left 4 Dead'ler, Team Fortress'lar, Counter Strike'lar hepsinde zaten o başarıları yakaladı etti. Ama şu noktada artık Valve bir oyun geliştiricisinden ziyade, tam Deadlock'ı bir kenara koyuyorum. Deadlock'ta çünkü hani para kazanabileceği bir multiplayer MOBA oyunu. Artık bir platform sahibi. Yatmıyorlar tabii ki ama tırnak içinde söylüyorum. Herhangi bir oyun yapmadan yattığı yerden bile para kazanabilecek ve bu kadar garanti bir şekilde kendi sırtını sağlama aldıktan sonra bu tarz insanları motive etmek çok zor ve ben şunu anladım. Gabe Newell hiç duygusal bir adam değil. Hiç. Yani herif konuşurken de, yaparken de o kadar net konuşuyor ki o dava sürecinde de işte bizi böyle dava ettiler, şöyle yırttık. Hacklenme sürecinde de, o Alman çocuk hacklediğinde de adamda duygusallık yok, fark ettiniz mi? Adamda hani hiçbir zaman Gabe Newell şunu demeyecek. Bir gün oturuyor evinde milyar dolarlık köşkünde, malikanesinde milyar dolarlık viskisi ya da çayı. Ya has siktir ya. Hakikaten şu Half-Life 2 Episode 3'ü ya da Half-Life 3'ü çıkarsaydık be. Yapayım lan. Zaten 5-10 milyar dolarlık adamım. Ne olacak? Oyuna 5 yıl döksem, 500 milyon dolar da döksem koymaz. Sonuçta sektörün en büyüğüyüm. Para derdim de yok. Kafam da rahat. Hadi lan. Şu işi yapayım. Bir böyle kafamı koyayım şu işi. Hani Half-Life'cılara sözüm var. Onlara karşı bir yükümlülüğüm var. Yap demeyecek. Bu adam hiçbir zaman demeyecek. Biz Türk olduğumuz için belki öyle düşünüyoruz, yapıyoruz ama asla Gabe Newell öyle biri değil. Asla Half-Life Episode 3 umurunda da değil. Yani bu belgeselde diyorum. Half-Life 1 için de yapıldı belgesel. 2 için de yapıldı. Çok da güzel belgesel. Orijinal ekibin, benim işte dedim ya, Viktor Antonov'un yer alması. Ben seviyorum o adamı. Ama onun dışında özellikle şu son Steam sonrası Half-Life 2 release'den sonra geçen muhabbetler artık ekibin kendini yapmayı çok isterdik de işte oralara gittik. Team Fortress'lar yaptık. Buralara gittik. Şöyle olduk. Anca bu kadar oldu be kardeşim. Daha da şimdi şu saatten sonra da dönülmez ki demeleri. Yani son dönemde Valve'in çıkardığı şeylere bakın. Deadlock, Dota'nın kart oyunu, değil mi? Bir tane kart oyunu çıkardı. Bir tane Auto Battler oyun çıkardılar gene Dota ile ilgili. Dota evrenini genişleteceğiz. Oradan da para kıracağız diye. Onlar sıçtı batırdı zaten. Deadlock ne kadar başarılı olur bilmiyorum ama başarılı olsa hani bir Team Fortress gibi ya da bir CSGO gibi para getirecek ya da Dota gibi para getirecek hale gelirse zaten iyice ona abanmaya başlarlar. Ama hani mantıklı bir açıdan baktığında piyasada 100 tane MOBA var. Yani League of Legends'ından başlayarak getir bu şeye kadar. Günümüze kadar yani. İşte PlayStation çıkardı. Neydi? Concord çıkardı. Anında battı 2 günde. Öbür tarafta Marvel ayrı bir şey çıkarıyor. Smite var yılların bilmem ne. Hani dolmuş taşmış artık böyle olmuş. Yani böyle olmuş MOBA janrası. Ama Gabe Newell diyor ki ben de deneyeceğim. Ve bunun için büyük ihtimalle yıllarca bir ekibi bunun geliştirmesine adamış. Elinin altında da var. Steam var. Steam ne demek? Abi trade kartları, işte promosyon bilmem ne, oyunu bedava verdiğinde platformun içinde zaten en tepede olacak. Dünyada da 100 milyonlarca insanın kullandığı ana platform. Yani oradan yürütürsem vurursam buradan da yapalım. Hani bu MOBA şeyinde de var olalım. Hiç dönüp Half-Life'a ya da başka bir single player'e de gitmez bu adamın kafası. Bu adam bayağı soğukkanlı, cold-hearted kapitalist olmuş. Bu kötü bir şey mi? Hayır. Yani bu adamın kendi dükkanı, adamın kendi parası, adamın kendi şirketi. Yani neler yaşamış bu şirketi bugüne getirmek için gördük belgeselde. Ama biz de Türk'üz, duygusalız yani. Oyun dünyası daha doğrusu Half-Life konusunda duygusal. Ah be diyor. Hadi be Gabe abim be. Hadi be. Ama hayır. bundan olmaz yani. Concorde 5 saatte battı, evet, bu arada. Özetle böyleyken böyle hanımlar beyler. Gene